Chapter 37. The Disappearance of Kreacher. It had been nearly a month since Harry, Ron, and Draco settled into 12 Grimmauld Place, and Harry was beginning to appreciate that the Dursleys had actually been easygoing by comparison. The Black family home was enormous, a labyrinth of drafty corridors and cavernous rooms stuffed with dusty heirlooms. Paintings of grim-faced ancestors glowered down from the walls. Racks of silverware gleamed faintly under thick layers of tarnish. Sirius had grand plans to modernize the place the moment he walked free from Azkaban. He dreamt of tossing out every neurotic relic and rearranging the furniture to suit his tastes. But once he legally inherited the estate, he found himself trapped by Black family traditions. He wasn't permitted to discard so much as a single chair. The best he could do was shift a chaise lounge from one end of the drawing room to the other. To make matters worse, Kreacher had already spirited away many of the items Sirius had earmarked for removal, hiding them in secret cupboards and behind false panels. Harry didn't mind most of the old decor, but he was equally mystified by Kreacher's obsessive antics. He'd seen the house elves scuttle down hidden passageways to retrieve moth-eaten blankets at Kreacher's command, only to return and tuck them safely away once Sirius reprimanded them. It was cumbersome, but there was a silver lining. In the process, they'd uncovered previously unknown corners of the mansion, coffers of old Black family documents, long-forgotten trunks filled with parchment scrolls, and once, a trunk of spectacularly detailed wizarding robes. The discovery that day began innocently enough. Harry, Ron, and Draco were testing Draco's latest trick on their enchanted bamboo dragonflies, sending the tiny mechanized insects buzzing through the cavernous drawing room. Ron, riding a particularly nimble dragonfly, swooped low to avoid a grand piano. His broomstick handles flared in surprise when the dragonfly bounced off something soft and velvety mid-air. Ron's wand twitched, and the motion tore back a heavy curtain that Harry hadn't even noticed before, revealing a narrow door set into the paneling. Harry's heart sped up. The door was unassuming, no handle, no keyhole, and its wood grain matched the walls so precisely it had been invisible. "Blimey," Ron whispered, hovering inches from the frame. Draco pulled his dragonfly back and landed neatly beside them, his pale eyebrows raised. "Secret passages," he hissed with a grin. "Every decent old wizarding mansion's got them." With Draco's help, Harry whispered Alohomora. The lock clicked softly, and the door swung open on silent hinges. The boys exchanged glances, then slipped through. Inside lay a narrow corridor lined with ancient cobwebs and oil lamps, their glass sides cracked and blackened. The air was thick with dust and the scent of old books. "Come on," Harry urged, moving forward. At the end of the corridor, they pushed open another door and stepped into a small, dimly lit storage room. Crates and trunks lay heaped against the far wall. In the center stood Kreacher's usual laundry chest, its lid propped open and empty. Harry's stomach dropped. The house elf's blanket, his blue and white polka dot tea towel, everything was gone. "He's gone," Ron said quietly, stepping inside. "Kreacher's vanished." Harry clenched his jaw. The disappearance of Kreacher was more than just a puzzle. It hinted at darker magic, or at least some secret of the Black family, yet to be revealed. With exchanged glances, the three boys began rifling through the trunks for any clue, determined to uncover where Kreacher had gone and why. Harry skidded to a halt just inches from Draco, though it wasn't really Draco at all, but a life-size portrait of an old woman in a black hat. She was shrieking so violently her yellowed cheeks strained, drool spattered her chin, and her claw-like fingers lashed at the air. From further down the corridor came more frantic screams, echoing off the stone walls. Harry and Draco both hit the floor and clamped over their ears. Ron hurtled over, yanking at the heavy velvet curtain that framed the portrait, but it wouldn't budge. The woman's shrieks rose to a screeching pitch as she rattled off insult after insult. "Beast! Bitch! Dirty, sinful bastard! Freak! Ugly freak! Get out of my house, you filthy defiler!" Then a calm, authoritative voice cut through the chaos. "Quiet!" Sirius's command reverberated down the hall, and astonishingly, every portrait fell silent, including the enraged old lady who turned to Sirius with a gaze so furious it seemed she'd devour him whole. Sirius glanced over at Harry with a wry smile. "Some perks of being head of the family, right?" Sirius stepped forward and addressed the portrait with quiet authority. "Mother, I am the head of the family now. Close your eyes and go to sleep." With that, the heavy velvet curtains at the sides of the frame slid back into place. Across the corridor, every other painting shuffled in its frame and blinked, each portrait drawing its painted eyelids shut in respectful silence. Harry stared, eyes wide. "She was your mother?" Sirius gave a bitter half-smile. "Yes, you know how Hogwarts is. Practically every empty space is filled with portraits. They each hold a fragment of the subject's memories and personality, almost like their other selves. Well, my mother's portrait is no different." Harry frowned as he absorbed that. If the painting mirrored her true nature, then she must have been every bit as ruthless as Sirius had often warned. "She despises everyone who isn't a pure-blood witch or wizard," Sirius continued softly. "Stubborn, proud, intolerant. She hates anything or anyone who doesn't meet her exacting standards. And yes, that includes me." Harry thought back to the moment's strangeness. "Just now you said Draco visited, didn't you? She didn't recognize him?" Sirius nodded his head. "Can you believe it? To her, all the Malfoys blur together. Pale skin, pale gold hair. My brother Regulus paid her a visit too, not long before he died. She barely bothered to acknowledge him. Reg was gentle, sensitive, qualities she saw as weaknesses. He couldn't, or wouldn't, stand up to her. In the end, she cast him away, and he never recovered." His voice caught on that last sentence, dropping to a whisper. "Regulus is dead because of her." At that moment, Remus Lupin, who had been listening from the shadows, stepped forward and slipped an arm around Sirius's shoulders. "None of that was your fault, Sirius," he said quietly. "You can't blame yourself for what your mother chose to do." Sirius leaned into Lupin's consolation, but his eyes remained haunted, reflecting a lifetime of regret and loss. Across the silent gallery of closed portraits, only the flicker of torchlight bore witness to the weight that had finally been laid bare. "So that's why Creature's been acting so strange, and why he hasn't shown his face for ages?" Ron asked abruptly. He wasn't exactly worried about the old house elf. Ron's mind simply worked differently, always skipping to odd details that others overlook. Take Mrs. Black's portrait, for example. While everyone else fretted over Sirius's state of mind, Ron couldn't get one line out of his head. "He's been left alone too long, and my portrait has been giving him mad orders." "Creature?" Sirius replied with a shrug. "I never expected him to tidy up or cook for us. More likely, he's holed up somewhere in this place among the dusty Black family heirlooms. It's nothing new for him to vanish for weeks on end." He glanced around Grimmauld Place, as if expecting to catch the elf skulking in a shadowy corner. Usually he's moping about, muttering nonsense like, "I am a prodigal son, a worthless coward." To Sirius, Creature was just another relic of the Black estate, an unwanted artifact that happened to be alive, and one that carried the weight of awkward childhood memories. Still, he reminded Sirius of someone precious once, Regulus. Back then, Creature had been the one bright spot in both their lives. As far as Creature was concerned, it was best to steer clear of him whenever possible. The last time Creature showed up to fetch Harry, it was only because Molly had insisted. "Where does he sleep?" Harry asked, curiosity piqued. After meeting Dobby, his entire view of house elves had shifted. He'd read about them in books, but nothing prepared him for the real thing. "Down in the scullery, under the old boiler," Sirius answered, smiling at Harry's interest. "I thought you'd want to see it." Sirius believed indulging Harry's curiosity was only right. After all, Harry had become as close to him as James was to Sirius in their school days. He glanced over at Remus. "All right, Moony, let the kids have an adventure. You don't go back to Hogwarts until September. We'll talk about their lessons later, especially how to handle Slytherins." His voice dropped so low on that last part that even Ron, leaning forward for every scrap of news, caught nothing. A moment later, Sirius and Remus vanished up the stairs, leaving Harry, Ron, and Hermione alone in the tapestry-lined corridor. Harry squared his shoulders. "Come on, let's go meet Creature." Why he felt such a strong pull toward the scullery, he couldn't say. All he knew was that ever since he'd arrived at 12 Grimmauld Place, a little voice inside had been urging him on, and now he was ready to follow it. They reached the boiler room shortly afterward. When knocking produced no answer, Ron impatiently swung the door open. Harry and Draco shot him disapproving looks until the sight inside froze their protests. The room was a filthy ruin. An ancient boiler dominated the space, its rusty pipes dripping condensation onto a sprawling mound of grimy rags and foul-smelling blankets. The heart of that heap was hollowed out, forming what looked like a makeshift bed. Ron clamped a hand over his nose. "That can't really be where he sleeps," he said. Harry bent down beside the disturbing nest and peered at the floor. "I'm afraid it is." He pointed to the scattered breadcrumbs and bits of moldy cheese. Draco knelt to get a closer look. "This is definitely the place," he agreed. Together, they stood in silence, absorbing the full extent of the squalor, and knew they'd found exactly what they were looking for. Chapter 38, The Locket. Harry's wand tip cast a trembling glow over the cluttered chamber. "What on earth is all this?" he murmured, staring down at an open chest brimming with gold trinkets, coins, and, oddly, a tattered pair of trousers. Ron crouched to inspect a corner of the trunk, where a handful of gems and ancient coins sparkled. "Gold, pure and simple," he said, shaking out a handful of loose change. "But pants?" He raised an eyebrow. Draco stepped forward, brushing dust from a small silver frame. He lifted it with reverence. "Here, this is a photo of my mother." They gathered around as he rubbed away decades of grime. In the black-and-white portrait, a young woman with proud, imperious features scarcely glanced at the camera, as if her future son didn't even exist. Draco's lips pressed into a thin line. "She must never have met my father when this was taken, much less me." Ron peered at the image. "Strange, her skin looks darker here, and her eyelids heavier. And that chin, it seems broader than I remember hearing." Harry frowned in surprise. "Have you forgotten our visit to Malfoy Manor? Mrs. Malfoy has the classic pale skin and platinum hair of her line. Yet look at these old blacks. Some portraits show dark skin, some fair. The facial bones change, even the hair textures. There's no single black look, despite their obsession with pure-blood lineage." Ron snorted. Hypocrites through and through. Their voices trailed off when Harry's gaze fell on something half-hidden beneath the coins. A heavy, gilt locket emblazoned with an ornate crest. His heart pounded. This was it. The final Horcrux. Silence fell as he reached for it, knowing that turning the key on this little chest had brought them one step closer to the darkest object of them all. Harry was still lost in his thoughts when Draco's sharp voice cut through the quiet. It took Draco a moment to register what Ron had just said. Harry's attention had been fixed on the young woman in the pensive memory, not on their conversation. "Ron Weasley!" Draco's fury snapped into place, and he lunged at Ron, fingers tightening around his throat. "You saw my mother!" Ron gasped and clawed at Draco's hands. "No, it's not what you think." Draco shoved him away, face contorted with disgust. "Bellatrix Lestrange," he spat. "My aunt, and one of the most notorious Death Eaters to ever walk this earth." Though he had never met her, Draco had heard his parents speak of Bellatrix in horrified whispers, branding her a psychopathic monster. Her cruelties were legendary, most infamously the night she tortured Frank and Alice Longbottom with the Cruciatus Curse. Even her name was enough to make people recoil. Ron rubbed his bruised throat and offered a weak apology. "I'm sorry, Malfoy. I didn't mean to upset you. It's just, while I was wandering around, I thought I saw something." Draco crossed his arms, scowling. "Saw what?" Ron nodded toward the fireplace mantel. "That locket, in the living room." He pointed to a delicate golden piece lying among family heirlooms. Emeralds threaded through the surface formed a sinuous snake-shaped S. Draco's eyes narrowed as he recognized the emblem. "That," he said quietly, "is a Slytherin heirloom." Sirius had tossed it aside, but Creature snatched it up before it could hit the floor. Harry raised an eyebrow as he watched the house elf cradle the object. He leaned forward for a closer look and instantly felt it. A cold jolt at the scar on his forehead, a burning heat in his chest. Only one name ever stirred such a reaction: Voldemort. Draco's breath caught. That's Slytherin's locket." "Slytherin?" Harry croaked, his voice unsteady. He stared down at the tarnished silver chain, his mind racing. Could this surge of dread really have nothing to do with Voldemort, but instead with Salazar Slytherin himself? After all, Harry alone knew he spoke Parseltongue, and from Bob Ogden's memories, he'd learned that the Potters and the Gaunts shared a distant bloodline. A sudden crack of magic announced Creature's return to their side. E. The elf emerged from a swirl of ash and embers, barely half a man's height, his skin drawn and ashen, wisps of white hair tumbling from his bat-like ears. He still wore the filthy rags he'd claimed as his only clothing, but his expression was unrecognizable. Gone was the sullen, beaten look of the first meeting. In its place burned fierce determination. "Stay away from it," Creature snarled, advancing so fast the chain rattled in his grasp. His ancient eyes gleamed with anger as he lunged toward the locket, as though he meant to snatch it and protect it at any cost. This time, Creature's reply was nothing like a house elf's usual curt refusal. He didn't announce his name, and though he'd openly scorned Ron as a pure-blood traitor's son before, now there was none of that insolence. After all, Ron was of pure-blood descent and related to the Black family. He deserved at least a snide greeting, if not total contempt. Ron picked up on the shift instantly. "Creature, you're not going to?" Draco cut him off, tugging at Ron's sleeve. "It's the locket. We need to go now." That shook Ron out of his surprise. This was Creature's territory. They had no right to linger uninvited. He swallowed and nodded. "Right? Let's Harry?" Ron glanced over at his friend and froze. Harry's feet seemed rooted to the dusty floorboards, his eyes fixed on Creature. More astonishing still was the elf himself. Creature's usual twisted sneer was gone, replaced by a look of deep inner conflict, as though two wills warred behind that sagging mask of wrinkles. At last, the old elf's voice quavered. "Harry Potter may stay." It was the only course he could take, bound by Master Regulus Black's dying command to protect the one destined to destroy the locket. He stammered on, glancing helplessly at Harry. "Can you destroy it, as you did that man?" Creature's gray eyes blinked wide, and for a moment he looked genuinely small and pitiable. Draco stepped forward, concern in his gaze. "Harry, we should go." Reluctantly, Harry moved. Draco slipped his hand into Harry's, and together they turned to leave, leaving Creature alone with the locket's faint, ominous glow. Harry's heart pounded as he stared at the heavy golden locket in his hand. What if Regulus Black's orders were a trap? After all, Regulus had been Sirius's brother, yes, but he'd also been a Death Eater. Why should Harry trust anything a Death Eater commanded? Perhaps the locket was part of Hogwarts' ancient defenses. If it really had to be destroyed, wouldn't it make sense to find Sirius first? "No," Harry said, his voice tight. "Draco, I can't walk away now." He raised the locket, glancing at Ron, at Draco, even at Creature, who hovered close by, eyes gleaming with anxious hope. "It's so hot," Harry murmured, lowering his wand hand to cradle the locket against his palm. Draco jumped forward and pried Harry's hand free. Harry's skin was flushed, almost blistering, as if the locket were burning him from the inside out. Ron's face went pale. "Harry, step back." But Harry didn't move. With each nervous step he took, the heat in his chest rose higher, filling his thoughts until all he could hear was a single command, whispering in a language he barely understood. "Open. Open." The word slipped past Harry's lips in a harsh, hissing hiss. Ron and Draco both froze. "He's speaking Parseltongue," Ron blurted, eyes wide. Draco's jaw dropped. Even Creature trembled, whispering in awe, "Master Regulus's orders." Harry clenched his jaw. He didn't want to obey. Still, the locket seemed to demand it. His fingers tightened on the lid. Then, with a soft click, it sprang open. Behind two small panes of smoky glass, an eye glowed, alive, dark, and brilliant all at once. Harry felt that stare burrow into him, shivering his blood. And then a voice, cold, slithering, slithered out from the depths of the Horcrux. "I feel your desire." Not only was it speaking Parseltongue, the very language Harry used, but inexplicably, everyone there understood its words perfectly. "Ron Weasley," it hissed, each syllable curling around their hearts. "You long to match your father's greatness and earn your prefect badge. Draco Malfoy, you fear your parents will fall under Voldemort's sway. Creature, your bitter vow is my destruction, yet I can grant your every desire, yes, even the resurrection of Regulus. All I ask in return is that you stop Harry Potter." It rolled its eyes, and a subtle enchantment wove through its voice, sinking deep into their minds and coercing their wills. Ron and Draco couldn't help themselves. They drew their wands, fingers shaking. Only Creature remained at Harry's side, tears shimmering in his eyes. Chapter 39. Flame wizards are human at heart, no different in mind or spirit from muggles. Among all the magical races, centaurs, goblins, and the rest, Wizards are uniquely complex, and as a result, uniquely vulnerable to outside influences. Such complexity makes them easy prey for dark enchantments. So when the cursed locket began radiating its foul power through the walls of the cabin, Kreacher stood firm. His mind, as innocent and untroubled as a child's, responded only to loyalty. He planted himself between the locket's malignant glow and the two young wizards threatening it, Ron Weasley and Draco Malfoy. The house elf's skinny, gnarled fingers jabbed the air like wands as he hissed at the pure-blood heirs, boys who, up until now, dared to challenge him only with their words. "That locket," he spat, "belongs to you-know-who. Its corrupt magic is choking this room. I stopped Harry for his own good. I won't let you, or anyone, touch it." Ron's heart hammered. He felt the dark magic tugging at his thoughts, urging him to grab the locket and fling it away. Yet his loyalty to Harry held him in place. He drew his wand, though he no move to attack. Draco mirrored his stance, eyes narrowed, wand at the ready. In the charged silence, the cabin seemed to burn with invisible flames. Each of them waited, ready to act, yet caught between fear, duty, and the unbreakable bonds of friendship. He'd convinced himself it was for Harry's own good. After all, even one of Regulus Black's former Death Eaters had praised such bravery. But Harry needed no outside validation. The power of a wizard was born in the mind, wild, unpredictable, and capable of miracles when steered by hope. With every step he took, a fiery red current of magic pulsed through his veins, weaving an invisible shield around him as he descended deeper into darkness. His wand, tucked in his pocket, began to warm until it trembled in his hand, alive with anticipation. A cool nip at his forehead sharpened his instincts, and every nerve in his body screamed that he could not turn back. Ahead of him lay the golden locket, Voldemort's Horcrux, its tarnished surface twisting into a cruel mockery of a smile. Harry's holly wand sprang free, and from its tip a strange, colorless flame bloomed. Though transparent, the fire contained every shade of light, courage, loyalty, love, every good thing Harry had ever felt. It was purer than basilisk venom, hotter than any fiendfire, and perfectly honed to one purpose, to destroy the locket forever. "No, please, don't!" The voice came from the locket itself, faint but urgent. "You'll regret this. You too?" Harry's heart stuttered, but he gripped the wand tighter. The flame roared. The moment had come. The locket's hissing grew louder, more urgent, as the flame crept closer. And then came a piercing scream. A blinding flash of light knocked Ron's and Draco's wands from their hands. Harry threw up an arm to shield his eyes. When he finally dared to look again, the golden locket lay on the hearthstones, but it was nothing like before. The gleaming metal had gone dull, its surface pitted and lifeless. Even the emerald at its center now resembled a gaudy piece of plastic. Kreacher, standing behind Ron and Draco, froze. He cocked his head, as though he'd just woken from a deep, sweet dream. Then, in a trembling little voice, he whispered, Master Regulus's order is fulfilled." His shriveled chest heaved with ragged breaths. Tears and snot streamed from his face in an ugly waterfall-like flow. With a strangled cry that turned Harry's blood to ice, Kreacher dashed for the hearth at a speed no one would have believed possible from a house elf his age. He reappeared in an instant, clutching a poker. With a sharp crack, Kreacher brought the metal poker down, shattering the locket into twisted fragments. The relic that had caused so much fear and confusion lay broken beyond recovery. Silence fell, broken only by Kreacher's heavy sobs as he dropped to his knees beside the ruined heirloom. Once the last sliver of the locket hit the floor, Kreacher froze, and the poker clattered from his trembling hand. He collapsed onto the cold stone, shoulders shaking as tears welled in his hollow eye sockets. Then, almost in the same breath, his wrinkled lips split into an eerie grin, revealing a row of gray teeth, remarkably intact despite Dobby's earlier blow. It was as if he were laughing and crying all at once. The chamber fell deathly quiet, dust motes drifting through the shafts of torchlight. Finally, Ron broke the stillness, his voice tight with worry. "Is he all right? Is he even alive? Could he be cursed now that the locket's destroyed?" His cheeks were pink with shame, as if betraying Harry just moments ago now weighed heavily on him. "No," Draco said, shaking his head. "I don't think he's cursed. It looks more like relief, or even joy." He knelt to inspect the shattered locket pieces. But what was in that thing? It could speak to him. control him. It thought for itself. A blush crept up Draco's neck. He glanced at Ron, both of them caught between guilt and fear of Harry's reaction. Harry himself still faced away, oblivious to their unease. My father always warned me, never trust anything that can think on its own, unless you know exactly where it hides its mind, Ron muttered, voice wavering. That locket was definitely not benign. He swallowed hard. Harry, I'm sorry. His lip trembled. Draco placed a hand on Ron's shoulder. Me too. We were shaken, more than we ever expected. Even without looking, Harry stiffened, as if the room itself had shifted. The truth hung between them, heavier than any curse. The locket of Slytherin seemed almost alive, capable of reading our very thoughts. In a heartbeat, Ron and Draco both whipped out their wands and aimed them at Harry. Draco was the first to open his mouth, but he and Ron quickly bowed their heads, waiting for Harry's verdict. Harry offered them a calm, gentle smile. There's something I haven't told you, he said softly. Every time that state takes hold of me, I can feel everything around me, yet I never sense danger lurking behind. My instincts tell me my friends would never betray me, and if you really did cast a spell on me, I know it came from worry, not malice. Still smiling, he bent down, gathered their fallen wands from the floor, and returned them one by one. Relief flooded Ron and Draco's faces, both cracked smiles so wide their eyes glistened with tears. About 10 minutes later, the buildup of tension had fully dissipated, and they finally looked around the boiler room in which they stood. Was this truly Creature's lair? Had they come to the wrong place? Ron and Draco exchanged puzzled glances. After all, in the small room they'd just left, only the Black family's heirlooms had been laid out neatly. The rest of the room, especially Creature's makeshift bed of filthy rags, had looked like a garbage dump. Now the floor gleamed white and pristine, and even Creature's sleeping pile had shed its grime, taking on bright, cheerful colors. The rag draped over Creature's hunched form had returned to its original, vivid hue. Harry stared in astonishment. His cleaning charm always produced strange side effects. When he'd used it on Professor Quirrell, it had somehow banished the foul odor clinging to the man's robes. Now it had carried out an even more dramatic overhaul. Even Creature, who had been curled up on his side, now sat upright with his damp face hidden between his knees, blinking as he took in the transformed surroundings. Chapter 40. Regulus Harry lingered at the top of the staircase in 12 Grimmauld Place, replaying everything he'd learned about Regulus Arcturus Black. Sirius's youngest brother was remembered as quietly kind but cowardly, hardly the profile of a loyal Death Eater. In fact, Harry found himself picturing Percy Weasley whenever Regulus's name came up. He remembered the crisp little sign Regulus had pinned to his bedroom door. Without my express permission, no entry allowed. Regulus Arcturus Black. It looked more like something a fastidious prefect would post than a dark wizard serving Voldemort. And yet, the whispers insisted that Regulus had once retrieved a sinister object for the Dark Lord, only to have second thoughts and order Creature to destroy it. Harry's mind flashed back to the moment in the Ministry when he held Slytherin's locket. A cold dread washed over him, the same icy terror he felt whenever he faced Voldemort himself. If that locket had once belonged to Regulus, did the boy-turned-Death Eater shudder in the same way? Could he have found the courage to defy his master? Creature shuffled forward from the shadows, the ragged edges of his faded livery brushing the floor. Harry crouched beside him. "Creature," he said softly, "you told me the locket belonged to Master Regulus and was tied to Voldemort. What became of it? Why did Regulus order you to destroy it?" The house elf's huge, mournful eyes met Harry's. He rocked back on his heels, knuckles white against the cold stone. After a long pause, he whispered, "Master Regulus learned what the locket truly was, one of Lord Voldemort's Horcruxes. He realized the evil it contained, and he was terrified. Where his family bowed to Voldemort, Regulus chose to act. He ordered me to break it, sir, to undo the wrong he'd done." Harry's heart pounded. Regulus Black, a Death Eater by name, had risked everything to destroy one of Voldemort's darkest secrets, and in doing so, he had shown a bravery his brother Sirius had always insisted was there, just hidden beneath layers of fear. Harry's question came out in a whisper. He didn't really expect an answer. Creature had never once refused an order, but he wanted to be sure. He'd tell Sirius all his theories, and as Creature's true master, Sirius could pose the questions properly. After all, no house elf would obey commands that didn't make perfect sense to him. To Harry's surprise, Creature spoke. He remained curled on the floor, his voice muffled by his bent posture. "I will obey Master Harry Potter's orders," he said haltingly. "Master Harry Potter is of the Black family, and when the prodigal son commands, I must obey." Harry blinked. "And Master Regulus," he prompted gently. The elf's tone shifted to something wretchedly fearful. "Master Regulus was a good boy, sir. He joined the Dark Lord's service when he was 16. He told me that the Dark Lord needs Creature, that I must carry out every task he gives me, and then return home." At that last word, Creature's voice trembled with terror. Harry frowned. By Creature's own telling, serving the Dark Lord had been an honor in the Black family, just as it was for Regulus. So why did Creature sound anything but proud? Creature trembled so badly that his voice came out in a quivering whisper. "Unless it was agony, an unbearable experiment in dark magic, he could not have broken me," the house elf rasped. Harry exchanged a grim look with Ron. "That doesn't surprise me," he said softly. "Voldemort is capable of anything." Ron leaned forward, eyes bright with curiosity. "But what does that have to do with the locket? Are you telling us that Regulus just handed you over? How did you get back? Could it be that Regulus had a change of heart and saved you?" Creature's gaze flicked to the floor. He remained silent, but his posture stiffened with anger. Ron instinctively took a half-step back. Creature's low growl made it plain that the elf was still furious, particularly because Ron had tried to stop Harry from destroying the locket. Had Creature not remembered that Harry Hamlet was his master's friend, the elf would have scolded him outright. Ron tried another tack. "And what of the Black family? Bellatrix is still alive, and she's one of the Dark Lord's most trusted. Why risk Regulus's loyalty or drag you back into service when Voldemort could rely on her?" Still, Creature would not answer. At last, after a long, shuddering breath, he spoke again. "He brought me to a cave," he whispered, voice shaking. "At its center lay a vast, black lake, so dark it swallowed any light. A single green boat carried me across the water to a tiny island. There stood a stone basin, brimming with a foul-smelling potion. The Dark Lord commanded me to drink it." Creature's whole body convulsed. He folded himself into a trembling knot, as if the mere memory of that night still threatened to overwhelm him. Around him, silence fell, thick and heavy, while the three friends waited for him to gather his courage and tell them more. Creature's eyes went unfocused, as though he'd slipped through time itself and returned to that terrible night. He lowered his head, and when he spoke, his voice trembled with the memory of horror. "I drank it, master," he croaked. "The potion burned like fire through every vessel inside me. I saw things no creature should ever see, shapes clawing at me from the darkness, my own bones rotting away. I screamed for Master Regulus to save me, for Mistress Black, but the Dark Lord only laughed. He poured something small, a locket, into the empty basin, then filled it again with more of that wound-in-your-guts poison. He ordered me to drink, and when I could no longer stand, he shoved me from the rock and boarded his boat. He left me there on the frozen riverbank, alone." His shoulders shook violently. He slumped into the corner of his nesting box and lay there, whimpering. Harry exchanged a glance with Ron before stepping forward. "So, you didn't bring the locket back yourself," he said quietly. "Regulus went there to destroy it, and died trying?" Creature's head lolled, but he managed a faint nod. "It's incredible," Harry murmured. "Voldemort valued that locket above nearly everything else, yet it was lost because of the sacrifice of a house elf he never even noticed. Ironic, isn't it?" "It fits, Harry," Ron said, his voice low. "Regulus Black was the only one who could have slipped in, taken the locket, and left Creature behind. There was no other way." In the hush that followed, the trio stood before the trembling elf, understanding at last the full scope of Regulus's final, selfless act, and the heavy price he paid. Harry realized, with a twinge of frustration, that Creature would never answer his question outright. But maybe, just maybe, the old house elf would let something slip if Harry broached it carefully. Creature was fussing over an entirely different concern, of course. He was dying of thirst. He hadn't meant to stay by the Black Lake so long. He'd simply gone for a drink and forgotten to return. When Creature finally reached the water's edge, dozens of icy hands shot up through the surface, seizing him and dragging him down. Only by a miracle, elf magic, Harry suspected, did Creature escape back to the safety of Grimmauld Place. He spent the rest of their meeting blinking in bewilderment, refusing to say another word, but Harry had already worked it out. Those hands were inferi, set by Regulus Black to guard the locket in that cave. To claim the locket, anyone must drink the potion on the altar, Snape's vile brew that saps your strength and leaves you desperate for water. In that state, you'd be easy prey for the inferi, who can't be reasoned with. House elves, however, have their own brand of magic. Creature didn't rely on a portkey to get home. He apparated there, just as Dobby once did at Hogwarts, unbound by the usual wardings against elf magic. And so, though no one at Hogwarts can apparate, Creature slipped away to safety the moment he was free of those foul waters. Draco's outburst came so suddenly that everyone fell silent. He slammed a fist on the table and barked, It's obvious why he stumbled. He looked down on muggles and had no idea just how formidable they can be. And he never considered that elf magic, the kind we call slave magic, isn't the same as wizarding charms. He completely misjudged the stakes. Creature, who had been hovering in the corner, started at Draco's vehemence. The boy could be insufferable, especially given how he'd once tried to stop Harry, but in that moment, his pureblood confidence and sharp insight reminded Creature of his old master's own nephew. Later that evening, Creature made his way back to 12 Grimmauld Place, heart heavy with the echoes of Draco's words. As he stepped across the threshold, Master Regulus stood waiting. "We must go to the island," Regulus said, voice low. Without another word, he produced a battered old locket, the same one the Dark Lord would one day covet, and pressed it into Creature's trembling hands. Creature's knees buckled. My lord," he choked out, tears springing to his eyes. Regulus gave him a quiet, determined look. "I have a task to complete. You will wait here, and when I return, you will destroy this." He held up the empty place on his chain where the locket had hung moments before. "Do you understand?" "Yes, my lord," Creature whispered, though dread knotted his stomach. Regulus uncapped a vial of foul-smelling potion. "This will protect me," he said, drinking it down in a single gulp. His face contorted as the poison burned through him. "Now go," he ordered. Creature backed away, choking on the master's final plea for secrecy. From the mouth of the cave he heard a terrible splash and Regulus's muffled screams. Through the gloom he glimpsed the inferi dragging his beloved master beneath the black water. When Creature finally returned home, he found the house in chaos. Lady Walburga was wailing that something had happened to Regulus. His disappearance threatened to unravel the entire family. But Creature, bound by Regulus's command, could not speak, and so he held the locket close and wept unseen. He tried again and again to open it, to destroy it from within, but the dark magic would not yield. Every night he lay awake, heartbroken, haunted by the look in Regulus's eyes as he drank that cursed potion, and by the secret he swore he would never reveal. Chapter 41. Journey to the Cave. "We're going to find Regulus," Harry announced, his tone calm but determined. Hermione and Ron exchanged startled looks. Regulus Black had vanished years ago, but if Voldemort's locket Horcrux was hidden in that cave, they needed someone who'd been there before. Creature, the Black family's house elf, was their only guide. "But the cave is heavily enchanted," Hermione protested. "There are traps and inferi." Harry nodded. "It could be dangerous lap. Still, with Creature's help, we can bypass the traps entirely. The only real threat is the inferi, and they're terrified of fire. Besides, our magic hasn't been weakened, so we won't need to drink any potion to break through the defenses like Regulus did." At hearing his young master's name, Creature's sobs stopped as if they'd been cut off at the source. The elf lifted his head, eyes shining. "Find Master Regulus?" Yes, Master Regulus must be found. I will do anything," he cried, stamping a foot. Harry raised an eyebrow. "Anything." Creature bowed so low his nose almost touched the floor. "Even if you must chop off Creature's head." Harry sighed, half amused. "No one's going to chop off your head. We just need you to take us to the cave." He paused, then added with a wry smile. "Actually, we don't even need your help getting inside. Just last month, the three of us slipped past every trap Hogwarts' professors and Dumbledore himself could imagine, all on our own. Ron puffed out his chest proudly as Creature, to everyone's surprise, gave a solemn little nod. Harry and Draco pressed their palms to their foreheads in unison, both silently wincing. Why hadn't they warned Ron about the other professor's traps before? It was so simple, so vital, and now it felt as though they'd squandered their one chance. Draco sighed. We might not get another opportunity, and if we tell Sirius, he'll probably abandon us just like everyone else. Creature's shrill voice cut in. You cannot tell Master Sirius. He is a bad. He stopped himself, clenching his small fists and rubbing his eyes like a petulant child. Master Regulus made me promise never to speak of the cave to the family. Harry stepped forward, forcing his tone soft and reassuring. Regulus only forbade you from telling family members, Creature. Sirius isn't in the Black family anymore. He escaped, remember? He isn't on the family tree. He glanced at Draco. He joined the Order of the Phoenix and has been fighting Voldemort just like we are. Telling Sirius about the cave doesn't break Regulus's order. Creature trembled, uncertainty flitting across his lined face. Harry continued gently. You're old enough to have misunderstood Master Regulus's intent. He didn't want his siblings or cousins to know about the cave's Horcrux trap. But Sirius, he's been nothing but on our side. We need him to know. Draco nodded. We can't afford secrets right now. If Sirius finds out later, he'll think we left him out on purpose. The house elf blinked, torn between loyalty to Regulus's last wishes and the urgency in Harry's voice. Finally, Creature let out a small, defeated sigh. Very well, I will tell Master Sirius. His voice was barely above a whisper. Harry offered him a reassuring smile. Thank you, Creature. You're doing the right thing. Draco crossed his arms, but allowed himself a relieved shrug. Together, they headed off to find Sirius, united at last by the truth. Harry hesitated. He knew better than to contradict Creature outright. House elves live by one iron rule: obey your master's commands. Creature adored Regulus. He couldn't bear the thought of having misunderstood him. His voice trembled with anguish as he protested, then collapsed to the floor in sobs. Watching the elf weep, Harry felt a pang of sympathy. If Creature were more like Dobby, free-spirited and willing to bend orders, he could have followed Regulus himself, taking the locket away safely. Perhaps Regulus would have delivered it to Dumbledore. Their mother would never have been driven mad. Sirius could have returned to the Black family, and his relatives might have welcomed him home. The defection of the Blacks might even have shattered Voldemort's ranks and hastened his downfall. Harry's own family might have been spared, his parents alive when he first entered Hogwarts, his future friends, Ron and Draco, already by his side. Closing his eyes, Harry regretted not finding a way to guide Creature around the misunderstanding. But the elf's grief was real, and the moment had passed. All he could do now was steel himself for what was to come. Harry stared into the flickering firelight, chasing a train of impossible daydreams. No matter what he did, Voldemort would still have tracked down the Potters. But perhaps Sirius's fate could have been different. Maybe his younger brother would have intervened, persuaded the Wizengamot to reopen the case, even administered the Veritaserum that would force the truth out. In that scenario, Sirius might have been cleared, and might even have legally adopted Harry. If Dumbledore balked, Sirius could have simply bought a house on Privet Drive and raised Harry himself. He shook his head, dispelling the hopeful illusions. He couldn't change the past or rewrite history. What he could do, once his magical skill was truly formidable, was find the Resurrection Stone. He'd have Ryan guide him to where it was hidden and bring his parents back to life, perhaps even resurrecting Sirius's brother alongside them. About 10 minutes later, Creature finally quieted. The house elf clambered onto his newly scrubbed nesting box and let out a triumphant belch. Harry watched him, an idea forming. Why not claim the cave as their own secret refuge? They could bring Creature there, keep Sirius in the dark, and with the Inferi lurking in the shadows, they'd be safe. After all the creatures feared was light and warmth, and Harry intended to keep their hidden sanctuary brightly lit. Even if we manage to bring Regulus's body back, Ron said, we still can't use blazing spells like Incendio, and I'm not sure a standard Lumos would be bright enough to fend off the Inferi. Harry frowned. He'd been so focused on transportation and stealth, he hadn't paused to consider how to actually defend themselves once they reached the island. That's it! Ron burst out. Why didn't I think of this sooner? We don't need flame at all. We need pure light. Lumos maxima. He spoke the words in a rush, as though he'd been holding them in for days. Harry and Hermione exchanged excited looks. Of course, the Inferi were animated by dark magic, and darkness, or at least deep shadow, was their ally. A powerful illumination spell could overwhelm them. We could do even better, Draco Malfoy added, stepping forward. There's an advanced variant, Lumos Solum. It conjures a beam of concentrated sunlight-like radiance. That would scorch Inferi instantly. Harry nodded. That's perfect. Voldemort can't send hordes of Inferi against us if every step we take ignites in blinding light. And there's another advantage, Ron said, turning to the house elf Creature, who was cowering nearby. Creature remembers the way to that island. He can ferry us there in the Black Lake, and back again. Creature's wide, fearful eyes shone with loyalty. If anyone could guide them through the waters and past the Inferi, it was the old elf. Harry laid a hand on Creature's shoulder. You'll help us, won't you? He asked gently. The elf bowed as deeply as he could. Yes, Master Potter. Creature will serve. Harry stood and addressed the group. All right, reconvene at dusk. We'll prepare our wands with Lumos Maxima, just in case, and practice Lumos Solum so we can unleash a beam of sunlight the moment we land. Creature, get ready the boat. As the others dispersed to gather their supplies, Hermione grinned at Ron and Draco. Brilliant thinking on both of you, she said. We've solved our biggest obstacle before we even arrive. Ron beamed. That's teamwork for you. He ruffled Harry's hair. Trust me, Harry. Tomorrow night, the Inferi won't know what hit them. And for the first time, in weeks, Harry felt sure they might just stand a chance. Creature had been down there for ages, and the water was frigid. Master Regulus would freeze without help, the little house elf insisted, practically quivering with excitement. Harry, Ron, and Draco exchanged worried glances, their curiosity sharpening into resolve. If it really is that simple, I'm willing to go, Harry said at last, turning to Creature. But if things get dangerous, can you bring us back? Of course, Master Potter. Creature chirped eagerly. Creature will find Master Regulus once we arrive, and if there's any peril, Creature himself shall whisk Master Potter and his friends back to safety. Harry nodded. All right then, let's head back to our dorms, gather what we need, and meet here again. We'll need fire, wood, rags, anything flammable, so pack it all into the bag Mr. Malfoy's father gave me. Despite his words, Draco, Ron, and even Creature remained rooted to the spot, their eyes fixed on a rag-stuffed heap in the corner, Creature's makeshift nest. Chapter 42. Cave Journey. Harry felt his knees go weak. In his rush to brief Sirius while the others prepared, he'd completely overlooked where they were, crammed into the boiler room, surrounded by stacks of dry firewood, mere steps from the kitchen's barrels of cooking oil and Creature's quarters piled high with rags. We're ready, Harry, Ron called, fiddling nervously with his wand. Creature says there's more than enough wood for a proper blaze. Draco tapped his heel, impatience clear in his voice. Let's move, Potter. We haven't a second to waste. Ever dutiful, Creature seized a battered oil bottle, drenched a bundle of brightly colored rags, and jammed them into Draco's enchanted carpet bag, still expanded by a trace-free extension charm. Harry hadn't even had the chance to ask for it himself. For a fleeting moment, he envied the Malfoys' resources and resented how easily they solved every logistical hurdle. Then came the crack. A crushing squeeze gripped Harry's chest, stealing his breath. In the blink of an eye, they vanished. When the world snapped back into focus, Harry found himself standing on a smooth black rock islet, scarcely larger than Dumbledore's office. At its center lay a vast obsidian slab, unmarked and perfectly polished, except for a single emerald light pulsing in the cavern's silent gloom. Harry paused at the cavern's mouth, the memory of Creature's tale still echoing in his mind. Beyond them lay the heart of the island, and whatever secrets lay beneath its dark waters. Ron and Hermione flanked him, their wands lit, but it was Ron who couldn't resist stepping forward toward a faint green glow. There, perched on a low stone plinth, was a shallow basin filled with an emerald green liquid. Phosphorescent motes drifted through it, giving the surface a slow, ethereal dance. The basin itself was carved from the same dark rock as the cave walls and set firmly into a square base that looked immovable. Hold up, Harry whispered, raising a hand. Let's review what we know. From Creature's story, the Inferi guard this lake. They attack anyone who comes too close. And here's the worst, if 3 or more Inferi surround you, any living person who falls dying in their midst rises again as one of them. In Voldemort's day, Inferi were almost as common as Dementors among Dark Wizard's defenses, and there's no doubt Regulus himself has been turned. They all heard the low drip of water echoing in the cavern. Ron, still entranced by the glow, held up a battered pumpkin juice bottle. I thought this was full," he mumbled, turning it over. The bottle was bone dry. Harry sighed. "Focus, Ron. We're not here for refreshments. We need to find Regulus among those Inferi and get him back." A deafening, yet curiously hollow crack echoed from somewhere down the tunnel. The trio exchanged tense glances. Their descent was about to begin. "Ron, I think this is a leftover enchantment from Voldemort," Harry said, scanning the damp stone around the basin. "He must have cast a ward on it, so that even the strongest witches and wizards, those whose magic survives the drought, can't satisfy their thirst with any water they carry or summon." Draco raised an eyebrow, but stepped forward, pulling a slender stick of wood from his pocket. "Vera Verdo," he incanted crisply. In a ripple of sparkling light, the wood reshaped itself into a delicate goblet. It was the most advanced transfiguration Draco could manage on the fly. He wasn't yet skilled enough to summon a vessel out of thin air. Holding the newly formed goblet aloft, Draco pointed his wand at it and whispered a hydration charm. For a moment, pure, spring-clear water brimmed inside the glass. Then, as if swallowed by nothingness, every last drop vanished. "He's that devious," Ron muttered, fists clenched. "We've barely had a chance to rehydrate. Between that ridiculous water and the hour we spent down here in the boiler room, I'm parched." Harry raised a hand to calm everyone. "All right, we need to prepare our defenses before we can hope to drink. Creature, wrap these Odin stakes in the oily cloth strips." He held out a bundle of short, pointed rods and a pile of dark rags. The house elf bowed, half trembling with eagerness. "Yes, Master Harry," he squeaked, already unspooling the cloth and swathing the stakes in slick folds. As Creature worked, the rest of the group gathered their wands and quietly reviewed the plan they'd need to face whatever lay ahead. The gnarled trees and mist-shrouded shore set Harry's nerves on edge, but the knowledge that Regulus might yet be saved filled him with determination. Beside him, Creature's battered little frame quivered with excitement. With a few delicate flicks of the elf's long fingers, a silent ripple ran through the fog. Harry reached into Draco's satchel and pulled out a bundle of ragged cloth. "Creature," he said, "help us with these." In a heartbeat, the elf's fingers wove elf magic through the rags, binding them into thick strips that Harry quickly wound around split lengths of driftwood. Within minutes, thanks to Creature's enchantments, they had gathered enough stakes to form a crude palisade. "Ron, Draco, help me plant these along the lakeshore," Harry instructed, passing each bound stake in turn. "Then leave a few to form a circle around us." Beneath the moon's pale light, they hammered the stakes into the soft earth. In under 10 minutes, a low fence bordered the water's edge, and a smaller ring stood ready at their backs. Harry stepped inside the inner circle and turned to his friends. "All right, here's the plan. On 3, Ron, you'll cast your summoning charm on the lake so the water surges toward us, enough to draw any Inferi from the depths. Then wait until they're nearly upon Draco and me before igniting these stakes." He tapped a handful of rags at his belt. "The flames will guide our way, or, if need be, keep whatever we conjure at bay." He glanced at Creature. "And you find Regulus. If you do, bring him straight here. Understood? If not, we light the fire regardless." The elf bobbed a solemn curtsy, eyes shining. Harry raised his voice for his friends. "On my count. 1, 2, 3, go!" 1, 2, 3, now! Harry cried. "Wingardium Leviosa!" Ron shouted. Light shot from his wand tipped straight into the lake's dark surface. The water swelled at their command, rippling outward in a great low wave that trembled under the moonlight, and the night's true horrors began to stir. Ron's spell shattered the glassy surface of the lake. Water exploded upward in churning waves, and all around, pale faces and skeletal hands breached the dark depths. Men, women, and children with empty, sightless eyes drifted toward the rocky shore. One by one, the Inferi climbed over the slick stones, their withered fingers clawing for purchase, their tattered, waterlogged clothes trailing behind them. Their hollow, malevolent expressions were fixed squarely on Harry, Ron, and Draco. Harry and Draco sprang into action. With a simultaneous flick of their wands, tongues of emerald and ruby fire shot forth, engulfing the nearby undergrowth. Instantly, the woods around them burst into flame, forming a fiery ring that roared between the trio and the advancing Inferi. Caught between two walls of fire, the reanimated corpses staggered to a halt, unable to push forward and unable to retreat back into the lake's inky waters. "Creature!" Harry shouted. Before another word left his lips, the house elf darted into the mass of Inferi, torch held high. The small figure weaved through rotting limbs and flaring embers, its single-minded courage turning the nightmarish scene into a battlefield of fire and fury. "I've found him! I've found Master Regulus!" Creature's high, quavering voice echoed through the trees by the Black Lake. There, just as he'd said, the Inferi had pulled Regulus under the water's surface. In one hand, Creature gripped a flickering torch. In the other, he held Regulus's limp body. The surrounding Inferi, dark, waterlogged corpses, crept forward with outstretched arms, their hollow eyes fixed on Creature. They halted, however, as if petrified, themselves unable to advance against the little house elf's desperate courage. Harry raised his wand, voice firm. "Get back!" he commanded the Inferi in the ancient incantation taught by Dumbledore. The creatures paused then, as if bound by magic, fell still. "Creature, let's go, now!" Harry urged, stepping forward. Tears of relief streaked down the elf's cheeks as he scooped up Regulus's body. Immediately, they were enveloped in a sudden squeeze of heat and light. In the next heartbeat, they reappeared in the dimly lit Hogwarts boiler room, standing before the hearth. Smoke curled around them, and the familiar crackle of the fire filled the air. "Master Regulus, you're home at last!" Creature murmured, pressing a soft towel, kept for just this moment, to Regulus's skin. He dabbed gently at the mud and grime, his hands trembling. Harry and the others stepped closer to examine Regulus. Remarkably, he looked far less ravaged than any other Inferius they had seen. His eyes, though dull, were not the empty pits typical of the risen dead. His features, framed by jet-black hair like Sirius's, remained intact. His skin was pale, marked only by scrapes and the residue of lakebed stones. Otherwise, he appeared almost alive. Harry exchanged astonished glances with Hermione and Ron. Regulus Black, once lost beneath the lake's dark waters, was finally home, and to everyone's amazement, very nearly himself. Though he didn't possess quite the striking good looks of his brother, he was undeniably handsome in his own right. "Harry, did we really pull this off that easily?" Draco asked, eyebrows arching in disbelief. Harry gave him a steady nod. "Yes, all that's left now is to call Sirius." Chapter 43, Sirius's Regret. It really was that simple. A bit of fire, some wood, and a handful of basic spells taught in second or third year, enough to undo Voldemort's magical trap. Of course, it hadn't been child's play. Creature's guidance, slipping straight into the trap's innermost defenses, had made all the difference. Now Harry had to endure Ron's triumphant grin. "See, we've shattered every ward Dumbledore and the professors put in place. Voldemort's defenses were nothing." Ron puffed himself up like he'd just scored the winning goal at the Quidditch final. Harry opened his mouth to argue, but Draco cut him off. "What about Regulus?" Draco snapped, eyes fixed on the former Death Eater slumped against a ruined pillar. Regulus's fingers, pale as marble, trembled as he clenched his wand. "Are we just going to stand here staring at him?" Harry frowned, rubbing his chin. "Any ideas, Sirius? He's alive, but he's frozen somehow. Think it's one of those dark rituals that turns someone into an obedient puppet, like a zombie or a ghoul?" Sirius shuddered. "Zombies reek, and they start oozing. Ghouls aren't as smelly, but they get hideously warped. Neither's pretty." Draco grimaced. "So bury him?" Sirius's face darkened. "No, we cannot bury Regulus Black. He's alive. He can still move. That would be unforgivable." Silence fell as the three friends exchanged worried glances. They'd broken the trap, but the real challenge was saving Regulus and finding a way to undo whatever dark magic held him in its grip. Creature's long, white-furred ears trembled, and he let out a startled squeal. "Regulus?" Sirius's lazy drawl seeped through the boiler room door. "Creature, what else of my brother's are you hiding down here? I told you not to throw anything of his away. Put it all back in his room." "Harry, you're here too," called Remus Lupin from the corridor. "It's almost dinner time." Footsteps crunched closer on the stone steps, then the door creaked open. Sirius strode in and froze. Amid the shadows lay a figure swathed in dark robes, Regulus. He looked unnaturally pristine, as if he'd just slipped into that very spot. "Regulus, you're alive!" Sirius thundered, hurrying forward to grasp the body in a fierce embrace. Creature, trembling beside him, let out a distressed whine and tried to pull Sirius away, but dared not touch his master's arm. The house elf's anguish was so intense it threatened to spill into tears. For a heartbeat, Sirius pressed closer, eyes full of hope. Then he stiffened. Gently, he released his brother's shoulders. The silence that followed was colder than any winter night. Why is he so cold?" Sirius whispered, voice trembling. He let his arms drop, face paling as the awful truth sank in. Remus stepped forward and laid a steadying hand on Sirius's. "He's gone, mate," he said softly. Creature dropped to his knees, head bowed. "I promised Master Regulus I would never reveal him to the rest of the family," he confessed in a small, quivering voice. "I kept my vow." Sirius's eyes narrowed, then unexpectedly softened. He closed his eyes and drew a breath, as if letting his anger out with the exhale. Wordlessly, he reached down and ruffled Creature's fur, an oddly tender gesture. In the hush of the boiler room, two broken brothers, one in life, one in death, were at last reunited, and Creature's secret remained safe. Sirius knelt beside Regulus's motionless body, his hands trembling as he brushed back the dark hair. Every touch seemed laden with regret. He croaked, "Maybe the Daily Prophet was right. I always believed I could sacrifice everything for justice, but I've become just like Peter. I just didn't realize it until now." His gray eyes widened with sudden understanding. As a scion of the ancient Black family, steeped in the lore of dark arts, Sirius recognized what Regulus had become. An inferius. These soulless corpses need no food, feel nothing for the living, carry no decay's stench, and are prized by dark wizards far above ghasts or zombies. To Sirius, turning Regulus into one of Voldemort's mindless servants was the ultimate insult, a cruel punishment for daring to join the Order of the Phoenix. Even Ron, no longer able to hide his relief, forced his countenance to remain solemn. He glanced at Harry and Draco, eyes questioning who would explain how they'd found Regulus in this state. Draco's silent nod left the task to Harry. Harry drew a deep breath and pointed to the corner of the room where a jumble of cracked glass and twisted metal lay scattered. "Earlier today," he said, "we searched Creature's quarters and discovered Slytherin's locket. I opened it in Parseltongue and found this." His words hung in the heavy air as everyone's gaze shifted back to the ruined heirloom, the key to a darker secret yet to be revealed. Harry couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something was wrong with these fragments, but right now he had bigger worries. Sirius's mood was fragile enough without any distractions. Still, a thought nagged at him. Could Regulus be hidden inside one of these pieces? It would certainly explain the bizarre circumstances of Blake's death. Sirius muttered under his breath. Slytherin's locket, one of Voldemort's Horcruxes. As a Black, I was fortunate enough to glimpse it once in my youth, and to think the Dark Lord would use such a treasured artifact to entomb my brother, for the sake of that mad woman Bellatrix. I've heard rumors they were close. No wonder Mother went insane. Her son, Regulus, executed because of me, and then his remains stuffed into a trinket and paraded around. It's preposterous. Harry didn't catch the full meaning of Sirius's private rant, but he recognized the weight in his godfather's voice. This wariness ran deeper than Sirius's old resentment, deeper even than the anger he'd shown when Harry exposed the truth about Scabbers back at Hogwarts. As Sirius fell silent, lost in bitter recollection, Harry steeled himself. Whatever lay inside those fragments, it was bound up in grief and betrayal far older and far darker than he had ever imagined. Harry cleared his throat and pressed on. After I destroyed the locket with the same spell that defeated Voldemort, I questioned Creature, and from his few words, I learned how Regulus was involved. Sirius's ears twitched as he shook off his reverie. Remus Lupin, unsure what to do, nudged Harry with his eyes. Harry offered a small, triumphant smile. His approach was working. Creature told me Voldemort once ripped him away from Regulus Black's side and conducted horrific experiments on him, experiments that nearly killed the poor elf. Voldemort, however, failed to grasp house elf magic. When Regulus discovered what was happening, he ordered Creature to return home. Miraculously, Creature survived and snuck back to the Black family. Harry paused, letting the moment sink in. Once Regulus learned not only of Voldemort's cruelty, but also the locket's hiding place, he forged a replica. Then he sent Creature back to Voldemort's lair to swap the fake for the real Horcrux, but Regulus himself never came back. Sirius slammed his fist on the table. Why didn't Regulus come home? Harry's voice dropped to a whisper. Because he died there, sir. Anger and grief contorted Sirius's face, all for that accursed locket, that piece of Salazar Slytherin's dark magic. He buried his head in his hands, furious that his brother had paid the ultimate price for a box. Draco Malfoy frowned as he studied the strange box between them. Maybe it's connected to Hogwarts' defenses, he offered. I always thought some of the school's protective magic was concealed in mysterious artifacts like this. Harry shook his head, his expression tense. No, when I look at this thing, I feel the same dread I felt facing Voldemort himself, and it almost seems to talk back. Have you read the Tales of Beedle the Bard? There's a story called The Wizard's Hairy Heart. This box is eerily similar. Ron's eyes lit up. You mean, could this be why Voldemort never died? Because he split his heart? Draco waved a hand. That's just a fairy tale. Not so fast, Harsnup. I said, a lot of the Beedle stories are real magic. We know the Deathly Hallows exist, so why couldn't this? If this locket really does contain a piece of his heart, it's one of his Horcruxes. Sirius Black rose from his chair, his voice low and fierce. I don't care about any of this Voldemort nonsense. I care about Regulus, my brother. That's why I'm here. He glared at the box as though it had stolen something from him. And I want answers. The room fell silent, the ticking of the grandfather clock on the mantel the only sound between them. Each knew this discovery could change everything, if they survived long enough to uncover the truth. Chapter 44. Inspiration from Mau's Heart. Sirius Black had always convinced himself he'd cut all ties to the Black family, his mother, his brother Regulus, everything that bore their name. In his world, loyalty to Jaime, the quest for justice alone mattered. Yet here, at the cave's edge, with Regulus's lifeless body before him, the secret of Voldemort's immortality suddenly seemed meaningless. All that burned in his mind was one question. Why had his brother died? Kneeling by Regulus's frozen form, Creature, the house elf, clutched his master's ankles, weeping bitterly. Sirius whirled on him, rage twisting his handsome features. You were ordered to fetch that locket and destroy it. You weren't to warn the family about this cave. Why did Regulus have to pay with his life? Tears tracked down Creature's wizened cheeks. Master Sirius, I tried, sir. I did as I was told. His voice cracked, and he pressed his trembling hands against Regulus's robes, as if he could still pull him back from death. Then why? Sirius's control snapped. He drew his wand in a heartbeat and aimed it at the elf's frail chest. Fury and grief warred in his eyes. Creature gasped, his thin body quivering under the wand's point. Then he lifted his gaze to Regulus's serene face. He rests now, he whispered, voice hushed with sorrow. At that moment, Remus Lupin sprang forward. Sirius, he barked, grabbing his friend's arm and wrenching the wand away. This has nothing to do with Creature. Sirius froze, the wand clattering to the cavern floor. Under Lupin's steadying hand, the young Witcher's wrath faltered. In the flicker of ghostly firelight, vengeance and mercy stood locked in a silent standoff. Two paths, one choice. Harry stepped forward, shielding Creature with a firm nod. Creature will obey my orders, he said quietly. He can't misinterpret them. After all, he serves his favorite master now. Before anyone could respond, Draco's voice cut through the tension. Do you really want to know why Regulus Black died? He asked, his eyes locked onto Sirius. Was his sacrifice worth nothing? Sirius's face drained of color. He swayed, then collapsed into Lupin's arms, as if someone had twisted a knife in his gut. Harry crouched beside them. Regulus died to protect that locket, he said softly, turning to the assembled wizards. You all remember the Horcrux we sought in the cave? It was hidden on a tiny island in the center of a lake, placed in an ancient stone basin. He glanced at Draco and Ron. The only way to reach it was to drink the potion in that basin, Harry continued. Regulus forced himself to gulp down every drop. The potion robbed him of his magic, burned him from the inside out, and left him in agony. desperate for a drink of water. A fiendish enchantment around the island erased every drop of moisture in and around you. Springs dried up, water bottles vanished. You'd be driven half-mad by thirst, then stagger to the lake, utterly powerless. Voices murmured in horror as Harry described the final betrayal of the cave's guardians. Once you reached the shore, the Inferi rose from the water. They'd drag you under, drown you, and turn you into one of them. Regulus knew all this, and he still drank that potion. He forced his house elf to bring the locket out afterward. They barely escaped, but he paid with his life. Harry stood, meeting Sirius's vacant stare. "Creature and I never had to drink the potion," he said. "We could fly across to the island with magic intact. That's how we got the locket, without succumbing to the Inferi's trap." A heavy silence fell over the group. Sirius, pale and trembling in Lupin's arms, stared at Harry as though seeing him for the first time. Regulus's sacrifice, and the lengths to which they'd gone to retrieve the Horcrux, hung in the air, binding them all in shared grief and grim determination. "We barely had to fight the Inferi. Once we drove them back, the shore of the Black Lake lay calm, and it wasn't long before Harry spotted the body tethered by Slytherin's locket. He hauled Regulus's still figure out of the water, and together they lay him gently on the shore. Later, gathered in the drawing room at number 12, Grimmauld Place, Harry gave his account of that grim little island, the Inferi, the hidden cave, the icy water, the locket's defenses, and finally how he carried Regulus back to safety. When he finished, Sirius Black rose and crossed the room in 2 strides. "Thank you, Harry," he said softly, brushing his fingers against the cold hand of his younger brother, "for bringing Regulus home." Harry let out a breath of relief, but Sirius's next words caught him by surprise. "But why didn't you tell us you were going? We would have come with you. I missed the chance to help save my brother's life." Remus Lupin, seated quietly nearby, gave Harry an affable sideways glance. Harry felt suddenly conscious of how young he and his friends must seem to 2 men who had faced the First Wizarding War. Sirius turned from Harry and looked pointedly at Ron. "All right, Ronald, now that we have Regulus back, tell us about this Horcrux. I want to know whether Regulus's death meant anything. If the locket is just some trinket of dark sorcery, then all this sacrifice would be pointless." Ron blinked. He hadn't expected to become the center of such grave attention. But he straightened, took a breath, and began in a steady voice. "The idea of the Horcrux goes back centuries to a wizard named Eldreth Edgecombe. Obsessed with defeating death, he studied the most forbidden branches of magic, splitting his soul in 2, then in 3. He finally mastered a ritual to rip his heart from his chest and imprison it in a glass vessel. His body lived on for a time, but without a heart, he grew cold, callous, and hollow. Dark wraiths haunted his halls. He could see his own soul's fragments drifting in the shadows. He lived on in agony until the glass heart shattered, and there was nothing left to keep him tethered to life." "That story isn't about immortality," Ron went on. "It's a warning. When you split your soul, you become less than human. You lose the capacity for mercy and love. You become Inferi in your own right, living death. A Horcrux buys you a few more years, maybe, but at the cost of your very soul." Sirius closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose as though to stave off a headache. Remus reached across and laid a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Harry watched Ron's face glow with earnest intensity, and he realized the young Weasley was right. This wasn't just a memento of black magic. It was Regulus's desperate testament, and a grim promise that Lord Voldemort would go to any lengths to cheat death. Sirius finally looked up. "Reg," he whispered, his voice cracking. Then he turned to Harry and Ron. "You've done more than bring him home. You've honored his final stand." He drew in a shuddering breath. "And we'll make sure his sacrifice wasn't in vain." Adby Wafflin's very first rule in Fundamentals of Magic is clear. If you tamper with the wellspring of life itself, you must be prepared to endure the most extreme and perilous consequences. Ron's cheeks flushed at the memory. He'd only offered a hint of the story because, strictly speaking, it had little to do with how the locket worked. Besides, Ron loved nothing more than teasing people with fragments of forbidden lore, leaving them hungry for details he would never fully share. Sirius, however, showed no disappointment. Where Harry recoiled at Ron's offhand remark about splitting one's soul to achieve immortality, Sirius, raised in a family of scholars yet adamantly opposed to the dark arts, felt a compulsive pull toward the darkest of magics. He instantly thought of Horcruxes, the ultimate perversion of life and soul. Comparing Voldemort's behavior and uncanny longevity to the passages he recalled from the Secrets of Advanced Dark Magic, Sirius saw the unmistakable parallels. Still, a flicker of doubt lingered in his mind. Something about the ritual's mechanics, as described in that forbidden tome, didn't completely square with what he'd observed. If Voldemort had indeed mastered Horcrux creation, there had to be missing pieces, clues that even the most detailed manuscripts hadn't revealed, and Sirius was determined to uncover them. Chapter 12. Flawed Immortality. In the dim glow of the study's candles, Sirius Black traced his finger along the brittle pages of the forbidden grimoire. To a muggle-born witch or wizard, this book would be the height of arcane mystery, but among pureblood families, the magic of its author, Helbo, the so-called most famous dark wizard, was little more than crude legend. No one of true pedigree trusted such raw, savage sorcery. Splitting one's soul, Sirius murmured, shaking his head. Any wizard who believes in an afterlife would see this as madness, not mastery. Could our Lord Voldemort really stoop to something so simplistic and dangerous? He glanced at Remus, whose anxious eyes reflected the flickering flame. All his arcane lore came from Hogwarts. He's no scholar of lost magic, just a boy with oversized ambition and too much faith in his own power. Sirius folded the page shut. His multiple Horcruxes? Sheer ignorance and audacity, nothing more. He was unstoppable only because he convinced himself magic meant everything. Remus lifted an eyebrow, but before he could respond, Ron's voice drifted over from the doorway. Honestly, hearing about your days in the forest helped more than any textbook, Ron said, glancing at the dark tome. It's shown me just how badly the Dark Lord misread the rules. Sirius nodded absently. He was holding his younger brother, Regulus, slumped in his arms, bound by ropes and trembling from the potion Lupin had brewed to weaken him. Regulus tried to wrench free, eyes wild with betrayal and fear. Quietly, Sirius flicked his wand. A single jet of silvery light shot across the room and struck Regulus in the chest. The effect was instantaneous. Regulus went rigid, every muscle frozen as though carved from marble. "Sirius! Regulus!" Remus rushed forward, wand at the ready. "What are you doing?" Sirius stared at his bound brother, voice calm and measured. "I'm repaying an old debt. And Remus, don't think I've forgotten who I am." He met Remus's gaze. "I am a Black, born into a line of dark wizards. Whether you like it or not, that heritage is now the weapon we need." He stepped back, letting the spell hold Regulus fast. "Now we have time to turn Voldemort's crude folly against him. Let's see how he fares when forced to face the consequences of his own blind ambition." Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, as though the very house were holding its breath. Within its walls, the Black brothers and their friends prepared to challenge the Dark Lord with the one power he had foolishly married to ignorance, his own fractured soul. Sirius Black stood beneath the faded rafters of 12 Grimmauld Place, trying on a bravado he didn't quite feel. "Inferi are the common servants of dark wizards," he announced, voice echoing off the peeling wallpaper. "All I'd need is one of my ancestors' journals to bind them, and Regulus could still serve our side. The Ministry won't bat an eye. Just a simple report, and it's done." He raised his wand. In a silent flash of silver, a round tray materialized in midair. From the shadows at the far corner of the room, the shattered fragments of the locket floated out, clinking onto the tray like broken promises. Ron Weasley stepped forward, concern etched across his face. "Listen. My dad's department handles seized dark artifacts. Tell him about this locket, and he'll take it off your hands. It'll be official. No questions asked." Sirius offered Ron a grateful nod. Though his own coffers were filled with Black family galleons, any help was welcome right now. Harry knelt beside the tray, studying the jagged shards. "And after the Ministry sees it?" Sirius hesitated, the weight of his next words heavy on his tongue. "I want to show it to Professor Dumbledore. Regulus died because of this, because of Voldemort's Horcrux. Whatever secrets these fragments hold, they're worth uncovering." Tense silence followed. Sirius breathed out slowly, eyes fixed on the broken locket. Regulus's sacrifice can't be in vain, he whispered. We're going to find out what he discovered before it's too late. Chapter 45. The true whereabouts of the locket. No one except Ryan knew what really happened the instant Harry thought he'd destroyed the locket. In that very moment, as Harry's holy magic collided with the dark, chaotic force bound within the Horcrux, a slender, pale hand shot out and snatched the locket from the air. The next second, an identical locket lay gleaming in the dim boiler room of the Smith family's castle in Nottingham Forest. From Harry's vantage, it had been purified, vanquished. But Harry didn't know that Ryan, infused with a fragment of Voldemort's malice and his own undying will, had resurrected the Horcrux and spirited it away. Now, 3 hours later, the castle's ancient stone corridors echoed with low, hissing whispers. From somewhere in the gloom came a voice thick with triumph. "You will regret this." A soft click followed, and the locket sprang open. Behind its 2 tiny glass windows glowed eyes as cold and triumphant as fresh victory. "I'm alive. The Dark Lord lives again." A small, curious voice rang out, shattering the Horcrux's exultation. Are you Voldemort?" Ryan, his soul twisted but not wholly lost, snapped his head toward the sound. Relief and irritation warred in those green-tinged eyes. Relief because it wasn't one of Dumbledore's Aurors. Irritation because of the interruption. Standing at the edge of the boiler room's flickering torchlight was a young witch no taller than a first year. Her silver eyes shone with innocent wonder. Though she clutched her wand fiercely, her magic was raw and untrained, at best, a second year's skill. Ryan closed the locket with a decisive snap and tucked it beneath his cloak. He let out a long, quiet breath, masking his impatience with a polite nod. "No, child," he murmured in a low, steady tone. "Voldemort is elsewhere, but you found something very dangerous." The girl's expression flickered between fear and excitement. She took a hesitant step forward. In that moment, 2 fates converged. The dark design of a reborn Horcrux holder and the bold curiosity of a young witch, unafraid to stand before it. And somewhere deep inside the castle walls, Harry Potter still believed the locket was gone for good. Why he'd reappeared here was anyone's guess. It might have something to do with the unexplored reaches of magic. After all, Harry Potter himself had become an unprecedented living Horcrux, and the clash of 2 such kindred yet incompatible powers could easily spark a new anomaly. His recent encounter, when he'd accidentally called himself the Dark Lord, seemed to have severed his connection to the little girl's mind, just as whatever surge of power had prevented him from reading her thoughts, unlike with the Weasleys or Draco Malfoy. The girl studied the pale, wavering figure before her. At last it spoke, its voice hushed and almost curious. "Hello, I'm Tom. Who are you?" "I'm Kate," she answered, tilting her head. "And what are you?" He stiffened, anger simmering just beneath his calm tone. "I'm not a what? I am," he hesitated, searching for words. "A memory." Kate blinked. "A memory, huh? So that's how you ended up here in my box. This is my home, you know." He drifted closer, shadows flickering across his features. "Yes, this chest holds secrets. Someone, during a battle, banished me with magic, much like apparition. Until now, I've been trapped between worlds." The dim light caught in his eyes as he leaned in, voice low and oddly persuasive. "But I've returned." He was certain that the irresistible power of his words would ensnare this little girl, just as he'd effortlessly stolen the heart of Ravenclaw's daughter, the so-called Millennium Ghost. Capturing her trust was only the first step. Soon, he would siphon away her life force, restore his own body, and supplant the main Dark Lord, emerging as the sole master of darkness. The child's large silver eyes brimmed with curiosity. Perfect. Her innocent eagerness made her all the more delectable in his mind. He could already taste the energy he would claim, and the thought of Lai, nearing on for more victims afterward, only sweetened the anticipation. Every detail of his plan felt utterly secure. He even toyed with the idea of switching to another host once he'd regained full strength. "Come closer," he coaxed in a hushed, honeyed tone, "and hold this locket. I'll show you wonders beyond your wildest dreams." "Okay," she answered, stepping forward with a delighted smile. But before her small fingers could touch the tarnished metal, the very air around them crackled with a boundless surge of magic, an abyssal force that roared into the room like a tidal wave. The Horcrux's triumphant grin froze. He was seized by an unseen power far greater than his own. No, how had he forgotten? When this presence first appeared, it had introduced itself, and the little girl, she had seen through his disguises and plainly asked, "Are you the Dark Lord?" In an instant, his certainty dissolved into panic. He realized, with bitter clarity, that he was now at the mercy of a master whose might he could neither charm nor resist. Voldemort's Horcrux trembled in the wizard's hand. It yearned to look up, just to glimpse the face behind that deep, steady voice, but its very soul recoiled. One glimpse, it was certain, and it would be undone. How could a fragment of the world's most feared dark wizard be so terrified of one mere wizard's voice? Impossible. Absolutely impossible. From somewhere nearby, a child's bright voice rang out. "Is this what you feed Jerry to make him grow?" "Yes, Kate," came the calm reply of the wizard, Ryan. Inside the locket, the air pulsed with dark delight. The Horcrux seized the chance. "Greetings," it hissed. "I am one of Lord Voldemort's Horcruxes, the keeper of his deepest magic. I possess knowledge unrivaled in this world. Whoever or whatever you are, Jerry included, you cannot value anything more than my secrets. Release me, and I will reveal every spell I know." But Ryan's answer was cool and unflinching. "No, Jerry is more important." Panic twisted through the Horcrux's essence. Born of Voldemort's own fear of death, this fragment dreaded oblivion above all else. Confronted with Ryan's unwavering will, it dared not risk its existence, even to uphold its master's pride. Then a sharp, disdainful meow pierced the silence. The Horcrux quivered violently, as though it faced its true enemy at last. Ryan's eyes narrowed as yet another plan collapsed. "He just failed again," he muttered under his breath. Beside him, Kate frowned, clearly baffled. "You don't see it?" Ryan shot back, voice heavy with sarcasm. "Voldemort's entire career is proof of how ignorant, reckless, and above all terrified of death he really is." He waved a hand, disdain curling his lips. He didn't stop at one Horcrux. He shattered his soul into pieces, hiding each fragment so he couldn't truly die. Kate opened her mouth, but Ryan cut her off. "Think about it. Tom Riddle hails from the purest bloodline of the Death God. His mother was a Gaunt, the very first generation after the deity who rules the underworld. That lineage should grant him a kind of nobility in the afterlife. Yet here he is, clawing at life with the desperation of a cornered animal." He leaned forward, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "In my view, Harry Potter, descending from the second generation of that same death god, actually holds the strongest claim to the afterlife. Because it's not magic or muggle blood that matters when you die. It's the strength of your will and the integrity of your soul." Kate shook her head. "But wizards have powers muggles don't. They can choose not to move on, stay behind as ghosts, remember?" "True," Ryan agreed, "but that's not immortality. That's a half-life of regrets and missed chances." And there's the rub. Voldemort deliberately lopped off chunks of his soul to forge those Horcruxes. He thought it guaranteed his return, but all he's really done is weaken himself. When he finally meets death on his own terms, when he can't hide behind fractured echoes of his soul, he'll find out the hard way just how fearful he's been. Kate glanced at him, uncertainty still in her eyes. Ryan pressed on, certain he'd made his point. He may have evaded death again and again, but every Horcrux is a wound on his own spirit. Someday, those wounds will close on him, and that will be the true test of his fear. Kate settled beside Ryan in the silent void, her restored brown eyes fixed on the shimmering projection before them. 2 hours had slipped away unnoticed as they watched Harry Potter and his friends work their way through Voldemort's stronghold. "Is that it?" Kate murmured, waving a hand at the scene. "They've already brought Regulus back, and Inferius, no less, without breaking a sweat. I'd expect more resistance in the zombie trails." Ryan grumbled softly. "Voldemort still underestimates house elf magic. He never bothered installing wards against it." He shook his head. "He's so arrogant, so sure of his power. He forgot the one thing he should have feared." Kate smiled, leaning closer. "Ryan, I've been connected to your vision this whole time." She paused, watching the flickering image of Regulus's chained form vanish into a swirl of protective wards. And I can read your mind." Ryan blinked. "Read my mind? Seriously?" He looked at her in surprise, then suspicion. "I thought our powers only let us share what we saw, not pry into thoughts. It's probably a side effect of our two strengths interacting. Kate said, her tone light but certain. Some unknowable field in this void. Magic even the current world hasn't charted yet. Ryan frowned, then shrugged. Well, I guess it's not a disaster. Go ahead, see what's on my mind. Kate's grin widened. Awesome. Because now you can't go acting all jealous and foolish between me and Penelope like before. She tapped her temple. Or Hermione Granger, or heaven help us, Fleur Delacour. He threw a pillow at her, which vanished in midair. Stop teasing, Ryan accused, though a reluctant laugh tugged at his lips. You know there's nothing going on with Penelope, and Hermione, she's not even remotely interested in me. As for Fleur, let's not give her any ideas, okay? Kate returned his laughter with a playful nudge. Fine, but I'll still be listening. Her expression turned warm. Honestly, it's kind of nice knowing what you really think, even if you're 20 times more dramatic than I ever imagined. Ryan sighed, settling back. All right, but if you start quoting my private thoughts at dinner parties, I'm out. Kate winked. Deal. She drew her cloak tighter around her knees. Now let's see how Potter and the others handle Regulus. I'm curious to know what Voldemort's next move will be once he realizes his perfect Inferius has been stolen under his nose. Together, they watched the projection shift and shimmer, the fates of wizards and dead alike hanging in the balance, while Kate held the keys to Ryan's unspoken thoughts, and he wondered if, for once, that was exactly where he wanted her to be. Kate leaned back with a triumphant smile. You know, when we were trapped in that vampire-haunted castle in Romania 3 years ago, I distinctly remember watching you pore over Penelope's letter for ages. She tapped her chin. It just struck me. Fleur was in the photograph she enclosed. Ryan cleared his throat, surprised. Fleur? I only know her as a pen pal. Exactly, Kate crowed. She's been your correspondent for months. In fact, she once raved about you, calling you a true gentleman. Kate's eyes gleamed with curiosity. If she thinks you're a gentleman, you must have met in person. After all, you're easy on the eyes. I've seen the photo. But what could have made such an impression? Ryan frowned, dredging up memories. Let's see. It was last summer, wasn't it? You and Penelope were off in France studying alchemy. Kate shook her head playfully. Penelope and I did head to France for alchemy, but not to Paris. We went to that little wizarding village tucked into the foothills of the Pyrenees. Fleur, on the other hand, lives in Paris and attends Beauxbatons Academy. She grinned, enjoying her detective role. I remember Penelope napping in our hotel room while I wandered the halls and bumped right into Fleur. She was deep in conversation with headmistress Olympe Maxime about her sister Gabrielle's enrollment. Kate tapped her lip. Surely Fleur wouldn't have praised you out of the blue. She must have told you exactly why she admires you. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck, a faint smile forming. You're right. I do recall now. She did mention something about my manners over tea at Beauxbatons. He chuckled. It all makes sense at last. Ryan's eyes flickered with distant memories. You know she's half Mew, he said quietly, so getting her enrolled is still pretty complicated. Kate frowned. How old is Gabrielle now? 5? 6 at most? I thought Beauxbatons didn't accept students until they were 11. You're right, Beauxbatons does, Ryan agreed, staring off as if lost in thought. But Gabrielle is fiercely devoted to her sister. She begged to start early, just to stay by her side. He shook his head. Honestly, she's such a brat. In the original timeline, she even stowed away to Hogwarts at 8, long before she was officially a Beauxbaton student. Kate smirked. Typical Gabrielle. She glanced at Ryan. By the way, have you picked out Mr. Delacour's gift yet? Fleur's father's birthday is coming up. I was thinking a pair of height-boosting boots would be perfect. Ryan blinked, confused. Height-boosting boots? He repeated. Is Mr. Delacour really that short? Kate hooked an eyebrow. Let's just say it's a thoughtful gift. Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to. Kate folded her arms and fixed Ryan with a steady gaze. Honestly, I can't believe you haven't introduced us to your family yet. After all the introductions you've had in Paris with Fleur's. You've met her parents, her cousins. Why not mine and Penelope's? Ryan winced at her tone. It's not like I've been avoiding you, he protested. Besides, today's the big exam. I almost forgot about it. Kate raised an eyebrow. The exam? Yeah, Ryan said, scrambling for his notes. First question, what protective enchantments did Voldemort set in the cave where he hid his Horcrux? Kate sighed, as if her patience were wearing thin. Why are you always trying to pick a fight today? That's Penelope's role in our study group. She tapped her temple. The real reason I asked you to link with my seer's vision was to examine the cave's defenses, using our link as a teaching tool. The clips of Harry and his friends inside were just fluff. I got distracted. Ryan ran a hand through his hair. Right. All right. Maybe next time, keep the fluff to a minimum. Closing her eyes, Kate took a breath. Actually, you did see everything, from the moment Harry destroyed the Horcrux-laden potion to when they found Regulus Black's body reanimated as an Inferius. Now focus. List every magical trap Voldemort left behind, and analyze how a witch of my skill, using your seer's vision, could detect or disarm each one. Ryan nodded, shoving his parchment forward. Okay, let's start with the potion chamber. The enchantment forces whoever drinks the potion to experience unbearable pain and despair. It saps willpower to prevent further progress. To counter it, a witch would need a complex counter potion or a buffering charm on her emotions, perhaps a water dilution spell combined with a mental shield. Kate scribbled notes. Good. Next, the Inferi. Rows of underwater corpses, animated through dark magic. They guard the island and attack intruders. You'd need a fire-based spell, like Incendio, to neutralize them, or a barrier charm to keep them at bay. Ryan leaned in, growing more confident. And finally, the rock barrier around the island itself, a levitation charm that makes the island float slightly out of reach. Disabling it would require breaking the levitation runes, either by counterspell or by severing the magical anchor points on the shore. Kate tapped her quill against the paper. Excellent. That covers the 3 major defenses. Now, let's discuss the strengths and weaknesses of each, and how quickly you could react if you were relying on both your seer's vision and my analytical skills. Ryan exhaled, relieved they'd reached solid ground. Kate shot him a slightly amused look. Tomorrow, you'll introduce us to your family, she reminded him softly. Deal? Deal, Ryan agreed, smiling. Kate nodded. Then we'll call it even. She gathered her notes, satisfied that both the exam question and his forgotten promise were finally on the table. Chapter 7. Into the Gloom. Ryan spread a hand over the cracked parchment, tracing the crude map with a finger. All right, he said. I've broken the cave into 4 sections. The entrance, the lake, the island, and the stone basin. Let's go through them one by one. Kate leaned forward, brow furrowed. Start with the entrance. Ryan tapped the map. Physically, it's almost impossible to reach by normal means. The cliff face is sheer, no ledges, no handholds. You'd need expert rock climbing skills to scale it, or a conjuration spell. Boats can't come within 20 feet of the shore. And there's a magical barrier, too, Kate added. I remember something about transfiguration magic tied to blood. You have to offer a vial of your own blood before you can cross the threshold. Ryan nodded. Exactly. You need to pour your blood into the carved glyph at the cave's mouth. That's why so few even find it, and those who do never get past the entrance. Kate tapped her lip. Gruesome. Why would the original enchanter require a blood sacrifice? To keep thieves out, Ryan said matter-of-factly. He wasn't messing around. But trust me, this isn't about revenge, Kate. I'm not forcing you into any trap. Kate offered a small, skeptical smile. All right, what's next? Ryan slid his hand to the next region on the map. The lake. It's infested with Inferi, reanimated corpses bound to the enchanter's will. They lurk just beneath the surface, and thin, invisible threads connect them back to your quarry in the final chamber. If you grab that locket without severing those threads, you'll awaken every Inferius in the lake. Kate's eyes narrowed. Then, how do we get across? There's a small boat, Ryan explained. You won't see it until you've cast a specific concealment counterspell. Once the boat appears, it glides over the water by magic alone. Any other method, broomsticks, apparition, you name it, and you'll either drown or be torn to pieces. Why not fly over it on a broom? Kate asked, her voice edged with frustration. Ryan sighed. Dark magic radiates from that lake. Even the air above it is thick with wards. A broom might carry you across, but those wards will reel you back, or worse. Kate clenched her fists. All right, no broomstick. What's the island like? Ryan pointed to a tiny blotch at the lake's center. The island is little more than a crag of black stone. In its middle stands a circular dais inscribed with runes of binding. That's where the stone basin sits, The island itself is unoccupied, no guardians except the magic that shields it, but the runes amplify the Inferi's hold on the locket. Kate frowned. So the locket is on the island, protected by the runes, and if we try to grab it, the Inferi go berserk. Exactly, Ryan said. He leaned back, folding his arms, which brings us to the stone basin. At the map's edge, a shallow depression was marked with a miniature basin symbol. That's where the locket rests, suspended in a quartz basin. It hovers over a pool of black water, lit by a single phosphorescent crystal in the ceiling. Beautiful, if you like horrifying things. Kate studied the layout in silence. So the plan is, scale the cliff or use a levitation spell, offer blood at the entrance, dispel the lake's concealment wards to reveal the boat, sail to the island, break the runic binding circle, and lift the locket from the basin, all while keeping the Inferi at bay. Ryan gave her a sharp look. Precisely. And once you remove the locket, the Inferi will lose their anchor and collapse into piles of dust. But if you fail, well, I don't want to think about that. Kate closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. We'll do it. I'm ready. Ryan allowed himself a small approving nod. Then let's prepare our spells and our blood vials. The cave won't wait. He rolled up the map, tucking it into his satchel. Tomorrow night, we move. Kate squared her shoulders. Tomorrow night it is. She cast one more glance at the flickering torchlight dancing across the walls. Let's bring that locket home. Kate eyed the surface of the Black Lake warily. With the exception of the boat, anything flying above the water is immediately pulled downward by the lake's enchantment, and the Inferi don't hesitate to come after you. Ryan nodded. Even on a top-of-the-line Nimbus 2001, you'd barely drift along at a snail's pace. The lake's magic empowers the Inferi. They can actually spring up out of the water and yank you under. Kate glanced at the solitary boat moored at the dock. The boat itself seems different. It senses the magic of its rider, and there's a limit to what it'll carry, right? Technically, it's bewitched to convey only one witch or wizard at a time, Ryan explained. But the enchantment doesn't apply to creatures whose magic is too weak to compete with an adult wizard's, or to muggles. That's why Voldemort once brought a house elf instead of a second wizard. He could have risked an underage student, but in his view, every pure wizard's life was too valuable to lose. Kate frowned. Does that include Muggleborns? Ryan smirked. Without the mudbloods he so despised, what would a self-proclaimed pureblood tyrant have to rule over? He shook his head. He needed every last witch and wizard, regardless of birth, to maintain his power. Chapter 47, The Living Corpse. Harry and the others had already covered the third and fourth topics, the island and the stone basin, so there was no need to go over them again. As Ryan's teasing of Voldemort wound down, Kate suddenly spoke up. All right, she said, cutting him off with an uncharacteristic firmness. That leaves just one question. Is Regulus alive or dead? Ryan's lips twitched into a sly grin. He leaned back, savoring the moment before unveiling his final challenge of the day. Kate's face fell. Wait, he's an Inferius, isn't he? He stopped breathing, right? Doubt crept into her voice. She'd been sure she wouldn't know the answer. Ryan chuckled. Okay, let me rephrase. Why is Regulus Black different from every other Inferius out there? He folded his arms, anticipation dancing in his eyes. Kate flushed with embarrassment. Even with access to magical sight, she'd never encountered this detail in any text. That's impossible. No wizard has ever studied why he's different. Exactly, Ryan said, breaking into laughter. Regulus was a wizard before he became an Inferius. When Voldemort's magic called the Inferi into being, the residual wizarding energy clinging to Regulus fused with them, making him unique among the reanimated dead. Kate exhaled in relief, rolling her eyes. Fine, you got me. That question doesn't count. I'll chalk it up as a bonus point for you. She checked her watch. Penelope's swamped with work again this summer, so I'm taking off, somewhere far away. Anyone care to join me? A ripple of agreement passed through the group as they joked about beaches and sunny skies, already looking forward to their next adventure, much less macabre than today's. If you want your reward, you'll come with me, Kate snarled, baring her teeth and flexing her claws. The question was simple. Hadn't Ryan noticed what he did the instant creature dragged Regulus into view? Caught off guard, Ryan glanced around and launched into a rambling tangent about anything but that moment. Hug creature! He's alive? How in the world is that possible? Kate pinched his thigh hard. Ow! Hey, am I pinching your leg? Ryan yelped as a network of black veins crept beneath his skin. Kate whistled. Well, he is alive. Sort of. Technically, he's become a living corpse. Ryan let out a shaky breath. Most so-called living corpses are muggles who've been tortured with dark magic until they die in agony. Their souls get trapped in a body that never decays. They can't move on, never be reborn. It's the cruelest, most evil magic there is, even worse than Horcruxes. Kate frowned. But why is Regulus different? He was a wizard. Wizards can't be turned into those things. Ryan's eyes darkened. Exactly. That's what's so strange about him. Ryan explained that no matter how powerful a wizard may be, in raw magical energy, they differ little from their peers. Their true advantage lies in the quality of their spells. In the practice of black magic, a wizard's emotions, anger, joy, fear, can warp the very essence of their power. When practitioners attempt to refine a corpse, the victim's final pain and terror manifest as curses. Those who meet death with courage hurl those curses back at the necromancer, undermining the caster's abilities and sometimes collapsing the entire ritual. Those who die in terror, by contrast, turn their curses inward and fade from the world before the refinement can even succeed. This is forbidden knowledge, jealously guarded by the great black wizard families, Ryan said. The dark arts could not advance without these brutal experiments. He paused, then added, Take Regulus Black, for example. After he drowned, his body was drawn into what became the largest inferi lake ever recorded. His lingering magic, a strange fusion of death and life, shows he did not die consumed by fear or pain. Instead, he carried with him a deep longing for his family, the pride of a martyr, and the secret triumph of knowing that Kreacher had recovered Voldemort's hidden Horcrux. Ryan tapped his wand, thoughtfully, before speaking. Regulus carries a wand that's almost instinctive in its magic, and it's semi-sentient. Combine that with the sheer force of his emotions in the moments before death, and he's become something very like a vampire. Kate frowned. But he lost his memories, didn't he? He did, Ryan agreed, yet he still retains vague impressions of Kreacher and his brother. It's a one-off miracle, something that simply can't be reproduced. How long can he live like this? Kate leaned forward, curiosity shining in her eyes. Vampires don't age, and muggles often assume they're immortal. Ryan shook his head. It's not true vampirism, but something closer to the magic used to create inferi. Inferi are corpses reanimated by binding the soul to the body with dark enchantments. Kate's brow arched. So it's similar to Horcrux magic, splitting or anchoring one's soul to achieve immortality? Precisely, Ryan said. In the East, there were the so-called lunar chains. In Egypt, elaborate mummification rites. In parts of Africa, resurrection ceremonies. All of these were attempts to extend life indefinitely. Zombies and other living corpses, enslaved by dark wizards, are merely byproducts of those experiments. Ultimately, both inferi and those animated corpses were created in the name of one goal, escaping death. Ryan leaned back, steepling his fingers. Regulus, the lucky devil who became a living inferius, has already achieved the immortality Voldemort chased. But that eternal life is brittle. Expose him to sunlight without a patch of darkness to hide in, or strike him with a burst of flame, and his body disintegrates, his soul finally sent where it belongs. Kate's eyes glittered. Perfect. We take over that cave, rent it out to wizards on the brink of death by old age. We cast a happiness charm to put them in high spirits, then slip their wands away and push them into the inferi lake to drown. After we bring them back, we simply bill them for the rest of the fee. They might not recall a thing, but their families and friends will remind them, and collecting from heirs is a cinch. Ryan shook his head. You're forgetting one crucial detail. No matter how powerful the spell, drowning is agony. A wizard in the throes of death won't be in a cheery mood. He'll be grasping at any excuse to avoid paying up. Even if they survive, expecting final payment or settling for no compensation would be wishful thinking. Ryan stood there, utterly speechless. So that was her solution? Kate lowered her gaze, her disappointment plain on her face. We could charge a one-time fee, she said, refusing to give up. Then we hire a handful of top experts, wizards with proven magical prowess, to guarantee results. We slap Regulus's name on the signboard as our seal of approval and let those elderly spellcasters, the ones desperate to undo their age, assume the risk. All we have to do is emphasize the importance of a positive mindset. If they fail, it's on them entirely. Ryan opened his mouth and closed it again. He finally realized why Kate was so determined. It wasn't about the money. Her family had more than enough galleons to spare. It was his fault that she'd become this way. 3 years ago, Ryan had poured every last sickle into recreating Smith Castle, a 1-to-1 magical replica. When his funds dried up, he spent every waking hour hunting for schemes to raise cash, everything from authoring dubious spellbooks to swindling tourists in Atlantis. Kate and her sister Penelope had watched it all unfold. They never shunned him for being nearly bankrupt. Instead, they brainstormed side hustles day after day, desperate to help him recover. Now, Ryan gently wrapped his arms around Kate, who still looked reluctant. "Kate," he murmured, "I don't need any more galleons." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, and at last, she allowed herself to smile. Chapter 48, Conversation at the Table. Ryan settled into his chair at the long wooden table, drumming his fingers on the surface. Across from him, Kate watched intently, her brows drawn together. "All right, I think I've got it," Ryan began, leaning back. "There's something important about that locket we need to clear up." Kate tilted her head. "Go on." "When Voldemort's Horcrux sensed me," Ryan said, "it assumed my magic was boundless. It admired, if you can call it that, the sheer magnitude it felt. But that was a misunderstanding. The Horcrux wasn't wrong about my strength. It was wrong about what true power means." Kate's gaze sharpened. She remembered how she had once delved into the darkest reaches of Voldemort's soul and seen his convictions laid bare. "Most wizards," Ryan continued, "even the so-called greatest, never wield more than 3 times the magical force of an average practitioner. Yes, your power grows with knowledge, willpower, and age, but not to the extent they imagine. That feeling of a 10-fold or 20-fold surge, it's an illusion." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Magic is spiritual energy. Its evolution is a qualitative shift, not merely piling more energy onto what you already have. When you break through a barrier, you don't suddenly possess mountains of extra magic. You refine your command over it. You change its very nature." Kate nodded slowly, absorbing his explanation. Ryan spread his hands. "It's not that our world's wizards lack talent or aptitude. They simply misunderstand what magic truly is, and that misunderstanding can be far more dangerous than any dark curse." Silence fell for a moment as they both considered the weight of his words. Outside, the late afternoon sun stretched golden rays across the table, illuminating the locket that lay between them, a silent reminder of the power and the misconceptions they were destined to confront. Ryan didn't need a magical readout panel to know his power level hovered around 49. To anyone in the wizarding world, the limitless regenerative magic flowing through him, an endless Ouroboros loop, felt eerily similar to the Dark Lord's own signature. He braced himself for the scornful looks he'd inevitably receive. "How much magic do I have, then?" Kate asked, her Ravenclaw curiosity shining through. For a moment, she even forgot about the trip Ryan had promised, and she seized the chance to ask, "By the way, where are we headed?" "If an average young wizard tests at about 10, Ryan said, "you're right around 21. He paused. "Honestly, at your age, you could give Hagrid a run for his money. If you two were the same age, you might even outstrip him." Kate's eyes widened. She absorbed the compliment, and then, smiling with anticipation, she leaned closer to ask more about their mysterious destination. Meanwhile, at number 12 Grimmauld Place, once the Black family's ancestral home, something utterly unexpected was unfolding in the dining room upstairs. An infurious, usually nothing more than reanimated corpses under dark magic, was eating. A golden roast chicken, savory beef pies, thick-cut steak, and crispy fried drumsticks, all meticulously prepared by Regulus Black, were vanishing into the creature's gaunt mouth. The whole scene was so strangely domestic, it might have been Percy Weasley's own place, if the notoriously prim prefect had suddenly taken up his younger brother Ron's hearty appetite. The flicker of candlelight revealed bones snapping, gravy dripping, and steam rising in gentle spirals, as though the inferious were blissfully unaware of the dark art that bound it to this life, or afterlife, of dinner. Regulus stood nearby, arms folded, watching with the satisfaction of a chef who'd just served the perfect meal to the most unlikely of guests. His marble-white fingers trembled as he fussed over the gleaming dishes, smearing oil and sauce between his knuckles. Creature hovered at a respectful distance, his usual ragged gray robes scrubbed spotless, his eyes alight with delight. Harry had never seen the house, elf like this. He was so enthralled he'd have ignored Dobby begging for freedom if the other elf had dared show up. Across the long table, Sirius sat with bloodshot eyes, his expression unguarded, as he carefully slid a slice of pie toward Regulus. The gesture looked more protective than indulgent, and Harry's chest tightened at the rare sight of Sirius's gentle devotion. "What kind of trick is this?" Harry whispered, already half convinced he was hallucinating. Draco sat rigid at the far end, his gaze glazed over as though wrestling some dark memory of Inferi. Ron, next to him, hadn't touched the roast on his plate. He shifted so nervously on the bench it was a wonder he didn't fall off. Even Lupin, who'd shared a room with them all week, looked as stunned as the rest. Harry leaned toward the werewolf. "Is this?" Lupin shook his head. "It's not magic. It's much simpler." He survived. Creature let out a triumphant chirrup and danced on the spot, fists clenched in victory. And there, in the candlelight, sat Regulus Black, pale, wary, and unmistakably alive. In that instant, Harry knew the maddest house elf in Britain had been right all along. He didn't seem to need food, and yet somehow he could draw strength from the darkness. Still, Regulus retained his memories. He knew to eat, and he knew that Creature and I were his family. In fact, Sirius had even reopened the portrait of his late, rather eccentric mother. Can you imagine that? But not a single sound came from it. When Regulus finally reappeared, steady on his feet, able to drink without aid, the wild ramblings that had plagued him were completely gone. Sirius watched him with something like wonder. For the first time since Regulus's return, Sirius's face actually looked relieved, alive. True, good food and rest had restored color to Regulus's cheeks, but until now his eyes had always been distant. Even Harry and Lupin's visits had only sparked a fleeting happiness. Beneath every forced smile, Regulus remained cut off from the world. "Shameless prodigal," Creature muttered in disgust. "Vulgar and ungrateful. He broke our mistress's heart. And don't you dare credit yourself, Master Sirius. It was Master Potter and his friends who saved Regulus's life, not you. Our mistress never insulted you, yet you've never once examined your own failings. Regulus lost so much, he even forgot how to eat properly. Couldn't you have taught him better? My greatest master Regulus deserves more than your hollow sympathy." But there was something oddly gentle in his tone, like the moment Uncle Vernon quietly told Harry he was a freak. Sirius wasn't angry, though. He was grinning so widely that his eyes nearly disappeared into slits. With a quick flick of his wand, the grease splattered across Regulus's face, hands, and collar vanished as if it had never been there. Startled, Regulus dropped his fork and stared up at his brother with wide, puzzled eyes. "Come on, Reggie," Sirius cooed warmly, picking up a plump chicken leg. "Let your big brother feed you." He offered the drumstick to Regulus, who hesitated for only a moment before accepting. Across the table, I caught Remus Lupin's knowing glance. "I suspect Professor Snape will not be pleased," he remarked under his breath. Ron pushed his plate aside. "What's that got to do with Professor Snape?" he asked, clearly annoyed. Harry, sitting next to me, sat up a little straighter at the mention of the name. Even Sirius Black showed no reaction to the man he so famously despised, yet here was Lupin speaking of Snape as though he were an old friend. I'd come to 12 Grimmauld Place for more than just lunch. Finding reliable work has become next to impossible for someone in my position. But the Daily Prophet's recent headlines about Sirius's return and a letter from Professor Dumbledore offering me the post of Defense Against the Dark Arts assistant at Hogwarts next year finally gave me an opening. So here I was, sharing a meal with old friends as I took one more step toward reclaiming my life. Remus Lupin cleared his throat as the small P gathered in the drawing room. Believe it or not, it was Severus Snape who secured Sirius's release from Azkaban. He leaned on his position as head of Slytherin and potions master. Dumbledore never even had the chance to intervene. The name snapped Sirius out of his lingering euphoria over reuniting with his brother. "What? Snape?" Harry, who'd spent the last few days absorbing the Black family's tangled history, stared in disbelief. Snape? He'd always known the man to be brilliant at brewing potions, but he can't be more powerful than Professor Dumbledore, Harry mumbled to himself. Ron, peering over the back of a leather armchair, echoed the doubt. And you're saying this is our headmaster now? Draco Black folded his arms, frustration creasing his forehead. I went through Dumbledore's letters line by line to make sure I wasn't missing something. I had the exact same look on my face when I realized it. Lupin shrugged, sympathy in his eyes. It's a lot to take in. Sirius rose to his feet, voice tense but steady. Creature, please, dinner for Regulus in the Great Hall. As the house elf scuttled away, Sirius's mind raced. He needed answers. What had Snape really done? And more importantly, why? Chapter 49. The Complicated Blood Relationship. Harry sat alone in the common room, turning over recent revelations in his mind. Ever since he'd learned about his father's dangerous, selfless efforts to protect Remus Lupin, risking everything to stand by a friend shunned by the wizarding world, his whole image of James Potter had shifted. It was one thing to hear stories of his father's pranks. It was another to realize James had put his own safety on the line for a boy cursed with lycanthropy. That act of loyalty had done more to restore Harry's faith in his father than decades of overheard gossip ever could. At the same time, Harry found himself sympathizing with Severus Snape. As a student, Snape had been quietly working for Dumbledore, nursing a painful crush on Harry's mother, and then suffering the sting of rejection when Lily Evans fell for James. Knowing this, Harry could see why Snape's resentment had run so deep. James hadn't been pure of heart, but his only real sin in those years had been challenging Snape over Lily. Harry no longer felt the urgent guilt that had tormented him before. Instead, he recognized the tangled roots of old grudges, which made what Remus Lupin told him next all the more astonishing. Professor Snape had secretly helped orchestrate Sirius Black's rescue. Harry blinked. Snape? He saved my godfather? Sirius, lounging nearby, grinned crookedly. Believe it or not, I owe my freedom in part to that insufferable portrait ancestor of mine, Phineas Nigellus Black. The old stick-in-the-mud managed to pull a few strings at the ministry after we got Peter Pettigrew out of Wormtail's clutches. Harry raised an eyebrow. Phineas Nigellus? The one in the headmistress's office? The very same, Sirius said, rolling his eyes. And of course, once I was back from Azkaban, he insisted on treating me to the silliest blind dates you can imagine. Teas and soirees with witches he thought might be a good match. If I'd known that was his idea of celebration, I'd have stayed locked up a bit longer. He chuckled. All that notwithstanding, I suppose I finally see why Snape carries such weight on his shoulders, and why he'd take a risk like that for me. Harry leaned back, digesting the irony. The relationships between their families, Potter, Black, Snape, were twisting into something far more complex than he'd ever imagined. And yet, perhaps that complexity held the key to real understanding, if only they could learn to look past old wounds. Honestly, Remus Lupin began, leaning forward, apart from James, Peter, and me, Severus Snape is probably the only person who truly grasps the depth of your friendship with James. Sirius Black frowned. And what does that have to do with my years in Azkaban? Lupin met Sirius's gaze steadily. The moment Snape was convinced of your innocence, he also understood something else. You saw Azkaban as your rightful punishment, your way of atoning for your mistakes. Meanwhile, the rest of the wizarding world called you a hero the instant you walked free. Sirius, imagine how that must feel. Freedom hailed as triumph when you saw only guilt. To you, that has to sting more than any Dementor's kiss. Sirius let out a dry laugh. Well, if anyone ever calls me unlucky, they should have seen the look on Snape's face when he heard how happy I am now. He glanced around the room, a genuine grin breaking across his face. Harry's here with us, Remus. My brother's back too. You can't tell me this isn't worth every second of darkness I endured. Harry, listening from the armchair by the hearth, felt a surge of warmth. It seemed as though Sirius, once haunted, bitter, and hollow, had rediscovered something like peace. As he watched his godfather laugh freely, Harry realized how far they'd all come. Unseen by them, the calendar on the mantel ticked on. The 31st of July was nearly upon them, Harry's birthday. And these past few days at the Black family estate had been nothing short of magical. Ron, Draco, and the others flitted about like house elves on holiday, and even the kitchen had undergone a miraculous transformation. Once cold and forbidding, it now hummed with good cheer. Pots clanged, ovens glowed, and a feast of desserts waited to be baked. Harry smiled to himself. If this was atonement, then Azkaban had failed to claim Sirius's spirit, and here in this rebuilt home, it felt as though the past shadows were finally losing their power. Before Harry and his friends arrived, Sirius had already set about renovating 12 Grimmauld Place, but the kitchen remained stubbornly drab despite his and Lupin's best efforts. Today, however, it has been transformed. Copper pots and pans glow with a rosy gleam, wooden tabletops shine under a fresh polish, and porcelain cups and saucers line the hearth, catching the firelight. A hearty stew bubbles cheerfully in a large cauldron over the open flames. Of all the changes, none is more remarkable than the transformation of Kreacher himself. Once perpetually soot-streaked and sullen, the house elf now pads about wrapped in a pristine white towel. His ear tufts look as soft and snowy as cotton, and his formerly gray teeth gleam like polished ivory. One almost suspects he's borrowed Mrs. Weasley's toothpaste, or even tried Gilderoy Lockhart's famed whitening formula. Elsewhere, the long, silent front door of Grimmauld Place has been coaxed back into service. Its bell, which used to slam shut with such force it rattled the entire house, now opens smoothly. Thanks to the restored entrance, Harry and the others can slip in and out at will, popping into the Muggle streets whenever they fancy a stroll or some pigeon feeding in the nearby park. When Harry and his friends entered the family portrait gallery, the first thing they heard was the sharp voice of Walburga Black, Sirius's mother. "So you're Sissy's child, are you? I see my ungrateful son hasn't fallen far from the tree." And then, silence. It was almost a relief. After all, she was the woman who once ranted that Dumbledore was a dark wizard, yet today she didn't even bother to curse them. Nor did she deign to acknowledge Harry or Ron, but that hardly came as a surprise. The Potters had always shown a friendlier disposition toward Muggles than even the Weasleys, so pure-blood purists like Walburga would have dismissed them outright. And Ron's tenuous Black connection explained why he'd always felt like an outsider here. His grandmother, Cedrella Black, was a generation older than Walburga and had been formally expelled from the family for marrying a lesser wizard, the same fate Sirius had earned. It was hardly shocking that Ron didn't get a warm welcome. If you sifted through the family tree, Ron's closest Black relative, aside from his own mother, who was a Black only by marriage, was the grandson of Cedrella's cousin. By generation, that made him a contemporary of Sirius. Harry, too, traced his Black blood through his maternal grandmother, who was another cousin of Cedrella's. In that sense, Harry and Ron stood on equal footing within the sprawling family branches. And then there was Draco Malfoy, the youngest Black by lineage. His mother was Narcissa Black, daughter of Cygnus Black, who himself had been the son of Pollux Black, Cedrella's cousin. In the grand hierarchy of the noble house, Draco sat firmly at the bottom rung, the last scion of one of Wizarding England's oldest pure-blood families. Harry had been poring over the Black family tree for weeks, and even with a chart in front of him the relationships twisted into Gordian knots. Without that visual aid, he never would have made sense of it all. One fact in particular rankled him. Neville Longbottom and, to his astonishment, Death Eater Bartemius Crouch Jr. were actually more closely related to him by blood than his best friend Ron Weasley. Here's how it broke down. Crouch Jr. was the grandson of Ron's grandmother's sister, Carissa Black. Neville, in turn, was the grandson of Carissa's sister, Calidora. By that reckoning, Harry, Ron, Neville, Crouch Jr., and Sirius were all part of the same generation of the Black lineage. One bleary-eyed morning, just as Harry was about to go cross-eyed tracing the last branch, he overheard voices drifting down the corridor. The topic was Regulus Black, who apparently spent most of his time in a darkened room to conserve his strength. "Sirius," Remus Lupin was saying in a low, serious voice, "if that locket really was one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, and it's now been destroyed, then there shouldn't be any Horcruxes left. The fragment of Voldemort's soul that appeared before Harry last year must have passed on to whatever lies beyond this world. In theory, that means the Dark Lord is dead for good. He paused, glancing at Sirius. That said, we can't be absolutely certain, and I don't see the point of tipping off Dumbledore until we have hard proof. Sirius Black, restless as ever, couldn't keep his impatience at bay. He slammed a fist on the table, eager for confirmation that Voldemort's shadow had finally been banished and that no new horrors awaited them. Their argument had been going on longer than either of them cared to admit. I'm telling you, I don't want Dumbledore involved with Regulus, Sirius said, his voice tight with frustration. Remus Lupin frowned. Are you worried about Regulus, or is it Dumbledore you don't trust? Harry grew up under Dumbledore's care, with the Dursleys no less. If you believe he was that incompetent with Harry, why should he handle Regulus any better? Sirius ran a hand through his hair. Exactly. I'd rather keep things as they are for now. But his condition is dangerous, Lupin pressed. What if Regulus actually becomes an Inferius? How long can we safeguard him like this? With our limited knowledge, how can we be sure of anything? Sirius sighed. If our theory about Tom Riddle is correct about Horcruxes, then Regulus himself might be one. We already destroyed one Horcrux, but we don't know how many more there are. Regulus could be in even greater peril. Lupin leaned forward. And what if there are more Horcruxes in that cave? As long as Voldemort holds sway there, our lives and Regulus's and Harry's are at risk. We need a plan. Sirius's voice faltered. Then, what do you suggest? Let's bring Dumbledore in. Lupin said firmly. On Harry's birthday, invite him over to examine Regulus thoroughly, a proper physical and magical assessment. If anyone can help, it's Dumbledore. Sirius exhaled reluctantly. All right. He paused, meeting Remus's gaze. But if he makes this worse... I trust Dumbledore, Lupin said quietly. We have no choice but to ask. And with that, the decision was made. Dumbledore would be invited, and Regulus's fate would rest in far wiser hands than their own. Chapter 50. Nervous Harry. Harry stood outside the portrait hole, his robes still rumpled from the headmaster's meeting. His heart pounded so loudly he could almost hear it echoing down the silent corridor. Suddenly Ron burst through the portrait, wide-eyed and breathless. Harry, that means Voldemort's probably dead, he hollered, only to watch in horror as the latest issue of Doraemon's The Dog Kingdom slipped from his fingers and thudded to the stone floor. Ron dove to scoop it up. No, you don't understand. This is the newest issue. I waited in Diagon Alley all morning 2 days ago just to get it. He hugged the comic to his chest. Damn it, Voldemort. On the cover, Luke Skywalker was pleading with Doraemon to stay, the leash tangled around their legs. Ron flipped through the glossy pages, muttering about how hopeless it was that Luke couldn't even care for a puppy properly. Draco Malfoy drifted into view, frowning. Were you not listening? He drawled. Lupin and Sirius suspect our defense against the dark arts professor next term is a Horcrux. If that's true, Voldemort can't be dead. He must have hidden more Horcruxes besides the locket and this teaching position. Otherwise, Dumbledore would have destroyed this one already and ended you-know-who for good. Ron shrugged, tucking his comic under his arm. Fine. But seriously, Luke Skywalker can't look after a dog to save his life. And Padme's definitely his real mother, right? He's not an orphan in the same way Harry is. He was adopted. Draco's pale face hardened. I have a father and a mother, thank you very much, and I am not an orphan. Harry folded his arms, exasperated. All right, enough bickering over fictional puppies and Star Wars trivia. If Dumbledore's right, we've got to track down every Horcrux before Voldemort gets stronger. That's a priority far more important than your comics. He fixed Ron with a steely gaze. Save the doggy drama for later. Ron sighed, clutched his comic, and nodded. Together, they turned toward the Great Hall, no longer sure if they were celebrating victory or bracing for the dark days still to come. Harry usually kept his temper, but Ron's jab still pricked him. If he didn't know his best friend so well, he'd swear Ron was deliberately mocking him. Draco sneered, Ron's good at everything, except knowing when to keep his mouth shut. Ron ignored the sneer and blushed as he turned to Harry. Sorry, Harry, I wasn't paying attention. What did you just say? Harry waved a hand dismissively. Forget it, Ron. I know you too well. Then he shot Draco a playful wink, though a bit of silence wouldn't hurt. Draco rolled his eyes. Speaking of surprises, Harry, just so you know, Dumbledore's coming to your birthday tomorrow. Ron's blue eyes went wide. You only just tell me now? Didn't Dumbledore come last year at the Dursleys' house? That's not the same, Draco replied. This is your birthday party, and having the headmaster hovering around would kill the fun. Ron huffed. Great, because nothing says good time like the most powerful wizard in the world hanging over our shoulders. Harry laughed and clapped Ron on the shoulder. Oh, he's not that much of a killjoy. But you're right, we'd better plan around him. Draco, you in? I'll need someone to steer Dumbledore toward the cake so we can get a moment's peace. Harry had met only a handful of full-fledged wizards in his life. Hagrid was one, and his own distant magical relatives the other. But of all of them, none captured his admiration like Professor Dumbledore. Hagrid spoke of the headmaster in hushed, reverent tones. Ron, too, couldn't help but beam whenever Dumbledore's name came up. Harry even found himself wondering if there were grains of truth in Draco's earlier suggestion that Dumbledore had secrets of his own. Not that the headmaster had ever done anything to court Harry's loyalty. His reputation alone was enough. That evening, as they gathered in the common room with the fire crackling at their feet, Harry fidgeted with his sleeves before speaking up. I've never really had a proper birthday celebration, he admitted. Back with the Dursleys, it was just ignored. Since this is my first real birthday, I'd like to throw a little party. I'd love for Dumbledore to stop by, Hagrid, Ron, everyone in Gryffindor, and, well, you're invited too, Draco, if you'd like to come. Draco's lips twitched in a quick, humorless laugh. Invite me? I don't think that would work. My parents, they're Death Eaters. Everyone knows they serve Voldemort. It'd be awkward, to say the least. Harry managed a sympathetic smile. I suppose you're right. Still, it means a lot that you'd even consider it. Draco nodded, the tension easing from his shoulders. Though his family couldn't come, he knew he'd found something here. Friends who welcomed him just as he was. Regulus is here, and Sirius clearly doesn't want anyone to know he exists. Even though the Blacks and Weasleys are distant relations, Ron stumbled over his words all evening. He hated that his parents couldn't make it to Harry's birthday party. But with Regulus under the same roof as Sirius, their absence suddenly felt inevitable. Harry only managed a small, melancholy nod in response. The next morning, Harry woke in a carved four-poster bed, blinking against the unfamiliar luxury. The mattress was so soft that every muscle in his body ached with listlessness. Above him, tall windows were draped in heavy emerald velvet. The chandelier in the center of the ceiling was festooned with coiled snakes that made Harry's skin crawl. It was a constant reminder of the gift and curse he bore as a Parselmouth. He couldn't deny that Salazar Slytherin's house had more to offer than just ambition and cunning. Between Snape's brilliance and Draco's privileged upbringing, he could see how Slytherin had attracted both scholars and the well-born. Parseltongue, after all, was one of Hogwarts' founding founders' greatest legacies. Yet Harry still felt an irrational shiver whenever he heard the faint hiss of those stone serpents overhead. He cast a wary glance at the ornate wall sconces, each one carved into a serpent's head, and wondered if he'd ever grow used to being reminded of what set him apart. Harry paused in the doorway, blinking at the window frames. Unlike anything he'd seen back in the Muggle world, tiny candles were set into the woodwork, their molten wax frozen in slender drips like pale ice crystals. It was oddly beautiful and oddly medieval. After all this time in the magical realm, he found himself missing the clean lines and electric lights of home. Magic was wondrous, but sometimes Hogwarts felt more like a castle from centuries past. He shook his head to clear the thought and crossed the room, stopping at the foot of his bed. There, neatly folded on the duvet, lay a stunning robe he hadn't owned a moment before. The fabric was a rich, dark green, and across the wide cuffs and high collar ran delicate patterns of gold thread that curled and intertwined like vines. Beneath it, a small scrap of parchment caught his eye. Unfolding it, he read, "Happy birthday, Harry. I thought you might like something special. I picked this dress robe because it'll bring out the color of your eyes. All my love, Sirius." A dress robe. Harry wasn't entirely sure how wizarding formal wear worked, but it sounded the equivalent of a suit for grand occasions. He smiled at the thought of Sirius shopping for him. Now, who'd made sure the gift appeared so discreetly? Creature, no doubt, fulfilling his master's instruction with all the precision only a house elf could muster. Harry slipped the robes to one side and tucked the note into his pocket, feeling warmth that had nothing to do with birthday candles. Although Kreacher wasn't as reluctant as other house elves to appear before wizards, he still clung to his old habits, working long into the night so his efforts went unnoticed by his master. Harry suspected the Hogwarts elves were much the same. He slipped into his dressing gown, pushed open the carved wooden door, and stepped into a breathtaking riot of greenery and blossom. Vines snaked across the silvery satin-like walls, their blossoms tinkling like wind chimes. As he drew closer, the flowers burst into harmony. "Happy birthday, Harry Potter!" Portraits of the Black family ancestors lined the corridor, their painted faces curled in disdain, though Sirius must have commanded them to oblige. Each one wore a stiff, unnatural smile as they gazed at the festive scene. Harry glanced at the clock mounted among the vines. It read 6:30. No wonder the house was so quiet. Everyone else was almost certainly still tucked up in bed. Harry realized he'd woken early simply because he was too excited about his birthday. He shook his head, grinning, and headed for the drawing room. Chapter 51. Lockhart's Car Overturns. About 2 hours later, Harry surfaced from sleep to find Sirius bustling around the living room, straightening silver banners and arranging clusters of white roses. "You're up early," Sirius greeted, pausing mid-decoration to square his shoulders. "What do you think of the dress, and the way I've decked the place out for your birthday?" Harry folded the Daily Prophet he'd been leafing through and set it on the coffee table. "It's wonderful," he said. "I feel like I'm back in Professor Sprout's greenhouse, surrounded by all these beautiful plants." "Exactly what I was hoping for," Sirius replied with a grin. "Our Potters have always had a thing for magical botanicals. Your grandfather James was the same, just wouldn't admit it. Pretended herbology wasn't manly enough until about 5th year when he, let's just say, decided impressing your mother was worth getting his hands dirty." He gave Harry a nostalgic smile. "Turns out, love and green thumbs go hand in hand, especially when you're brewing potions." Harry glanced at the prophet on the table. Across the front page was a photograph of Gilderoy Lockhart in shackles, still beaming broadly and flashing all 8 teeth. Sirius leaned over and tapped the picture. And speaking of overblown egos, Lockhart, that self-obsessed charmer, always flirting and pocketing other people's exploits for his books, Molly can't stop talking about him. Harry couldn't help but smirk. "Well, at least he makes things interesting." Sirius shook his head. "Interesting, yes. Trustworthy, no. Now help me hang these last lanterns before the guests arrive." Harry didn't know that Molly had even volunteered to help clean out the Black family mansion. There she was earlier, clutching a battered copy of Gilderoy Lockhart's How to Banish Household Pests, swooning over every page. "He's brilliant, Harry," she'd gushed. "He understands every creature that crawls through your walls." What a marvelous reference. But now Molly had drifted away, and Sirius was in the midst of a single, furious monologue. Clearly he'd been stewing over Lockhart for a long time. Harry, who knew his godfather's opinion of Lockhart all too well, could only grin. If Arthur Weasley saw this report, Harry thought, he'd be so pleased he might hug Lucius Malfoy himself. He stepped closer to Sirius. "This was your doing, wasn't it?" Sirius gave him a sly look. "Sharp as ever, Harry, but don't let Molly overhear. It really isn't much to do with me. Gilderoy's fallen flat lately. His pest guide bombed, so he rushed out a memoir, My Magical Self, in a desperate bid for attention. Now he's angling for the Defense Against the Dark Arts professorship at Hogwarts." He rolled his eyes. And with the Daily Prophet shifting its style, Rita Skeeter's sharpening her quill to reinvent herself. Wait until she uncovers what Lockhart was really like as a student. That'll be the fairest revenge of all. Sirius said it as flat as a plate, but the faint curl at the corner of his mouth gave him away. He was secretly delighted. "I just pushed him a bit, and now Rita Skeeter's sitting on a gold mine of dirt about Lockhart. And get this, he's already planning to apply for a teaching position at Hogwarts." Harry snatched the latest Daily Prophet off the desk and slammed it down, jabbing a finger at the print. "Look at this. After they forced him under Veritaserum, he actually admitted, 'If people don't believe those adventures were mine, my book sales will crash.'" No one wants to read about an ugly old American wizard, even if he did free an entire village from werewolves. And you try putting my photo on the cover, it'd scare off every buyer. I've got no taste in clothes. And that witch who expelled the ghost of Wanlon, she's hideously cleft-lipped. Harry's face went crimson. How dare he insult her, and all because of some fancy forgetfulness charm. Dumbledore would never stand for it. Hogwarts is like a second home to me, Harry continued, voice trembling with anger. How can a liar like that even think of becoming a professor? I'd rather see Voldemort himself teach defense against the dark arts. Sirius leaned back, tucking a stray lock of hair behind his ear. I hate Lockhart as much as you do, Harry. But this time, I think we've turned the tables on him. Sirius leaned back against the worn arm of the sofa, a mischievous glint in his eye. You know, he began, Dumbledore once admitted that if young Voldemort hadn't shown up, Gilderoy Lockhart would be our defense against the dark arts professor right now. Harry's eyes went wide. His voice hit a higher pitch than usual. Lockhart? Exactly, Sirius said, chuckling. That was my reaction, too. Even Dumbledore conceded he might have been mistaken. Though you know him, he wouldn't stoop to politics or manipulation. If there'd been no teenage Dark Lord at Hogwarts, Dumbledore would have approved Lockhart's application in a heartbeat. He lifted a finger. First, Lockhart's a Ravenclaw. His raw magical power isn't legendary, but his knowledge, his appetite for research, is undeniable. Second, every one of those adventure memoirs isn't pure fabrication. He personally visited and investigated the sites he writes about. At the very least, he'd bring real-life anecdotes to class. And third, the most crucial point, the defense against the dark arts chair is cursed. There's no better comeuppance for someone as vain and unprepared as Lockhart than that curse itself. Honestly, if I hadn't stepped in, the worst he'd face for spoon-feeding Rita Skeeter her black magic gossip would have been a slap on the wrist and a ministry fine. Chapter 7. The Consumable. Harry paced the small sitting room at number 12, Grimmauld Place. Absently tracing the tarnished silver of the old portrait frame on the wall, Sirius reclined on the threadbare sofa opposite him, arms folded, curiosity etched into his lean features. So you think Dumbledore picks his defense against the dark arts professors by how useful they are, how easily he can discard them? Sirius asked, leaning forward. Harry stopped by the hearth and met Sirius's gaze. Exactly. Consumable is the only way to describe it. Sirius frowned. Consumable? I don't follow. Harry nodded briskly. Last year it was Professor Quirrell. Dumbledore refused to pay him any salary. Can you believe that? He let Quirrell teach and didn't even compensate him. Sirius's brow arched. He didn't pay a professor? He didn't want to, Harry replied. But imagine the leverage that gives him. This year, it's Lockhart. He's charming, full of bluster, and utterly useless. When whatever curse or accident happens, Dumbledore will have Lockhart exactly where he wants him. A little scandal, a little threat, and suddenly the high and mighty Defense Against the Dark Arts post is his bargaining chip. Sirius shook his head, half in disbelief, half in admiration. Albus isn't a bad man, Harry. He's not that ruthless. Harry let out a dry laugh. You're wrong, Sirius. He's darker than you think. He'll do whatever it takes. These appointments, they're not about teaching. They're chess pieces, consumables. Sirius stared at Harry, surprise flickering in his dark eyes. The certainty in Harry's tone, and the way he spoke of strategy and sacrifice, brought him face to face with memories of James. For a moment, it was as if he were watching his best friend pacing across the old Gryffindor common room floor, dissecting some Slytherin stunt with biting humor and uncompromising logic. Harry's voice pulled him back. We keep talking about ideals and heroics, he said, but with dark wizards, or those who face them, morality becomes a luxury. You either seize what you need, or you get left behind. Sirius stood slowly, pushing impulse after impulse down into that familiar well of loyalty. He squared his shoulders. When you put it like that, I suppose you're right, but I still hope Dumbledore has limits. Harry turned away, gazing into the dancing flames. Hope they're big enough, he whispered, because if they aren't, none of us are safe. Silence fell between them. Bro, Ken, only by the crackle of the fire and the distant echoes of a war neither had fully reckoned with yet. Yet both understood, in that hollowness of shadow and embers, that in the game of dark arts defense, pawns are expendable, and even the greatest masters might be playing a deeper, darker game. Back in their Hogwarts days, Sirius was always the first to pick a fight with the Slytherins, but only because James egged him on. The same went for Severus Snape. James would rally the Marauders with battle cries like, "There's no shame in taking on dark wizards together. That's the true unity of justice, magic they could never learn." He loved boasting. A one-on-one duel means you're up against all four of us, and if it's a group brawl, then they've really got it out for the lot we've gathered. Those slogans, James's famous sayings, as they'd call them, echoed down every corridor, fueled countless skirmishes, and tightened the bond between Peter, Remus, Sirius, and James himself. But everything shifted in their 5th year. James wasn't the same prankster leader anymore. He grew distant, even moody. "Damn Lily Evans," Sirius muttered under his breath as he stared out the window. Harry, sitting across from him by the fireplace, snapped to attention. "What was that?" Sirius blinked, his eyes suddenly empty. He leaned back and gave Harry a thin, half-hearted smile. "Nothing, just thinking about Dumbledore." And with that, he fell silent, lost in memories he couldn't or wouldn't share. Chapter 52. Unaccustomed to Happiness. Harry and Sirius sat awkwardly in the old parlor, the afternoon sunlight slanting through the tall windows. Harry broke the silence first. "Do you think Dumbledore will come to the birthday party today? What about Remus?" Sirius lifted an eyebrow, then smoothed his expression. "No one's coming, or at least I haven't heard anything. You were rather loud about this birthday business earlier." Harry blinked. "Well, it is my birthday. You'd think they'd tell me if they planned to show up." Sirius shook his head. "They're all busy, Harry. Don't take it personally." Harry pursed his lips, then his eyes brightened with curiosity. "Sirius, what's a Horcrux?" At that, Sirius turned solemn. "That's not something a child your age should worry about." Harry frowned. "I'm not a child." His tone was firm. Right. Sirius sighed, attempting a reassuring smile. "But look at you. You're so much like your father. James Potter had that same stubborn streak. I can't ever say no to you." Harry's curiosity got the better of him. "Fine, just tell me what it is." Sirius folded his hands and leaned forward. "A Horcrux is, well, it's one of the darkest pieces of magic out there. It's not exactly clever." "Not clever," Harry echoed. "But if it makes you immortal—" Sirius cleared his throat. "It only grants you a twisted kind of life extension. And the process to create one is hideous. You have to kill someone, split your soul, and anchor a fragment of it to an object. That's how Voldemort did it." Harry frowned. "But ghosts exist, right? People we've lost are still around somehow. Doesn't that prove there's an afterlife? Aren't we better off letting them be, rather than get tangled in dark magic?" Sirius leaned back in his chair, looking at Harry with a mixture of pride and concern. "Exactly. You've got more sense than a lot of adults. Nothing's more precious than living a full life, without tearing yourself apart in the process." Harry nodded, comforted by Sirius's words. Outside, the house stirred with preparations for the celebration. Magic or not, Harry decided that today he would focus on the happiness he could truly hold: friends, family, and the promise of another year. "Sirius, explain it again," Harry urged, leaning forward. "How does a Horcrux actually work?" Sirius ran a hand through his hair and sighed. "To achieve true immortality with Horcruxes, you must tear your soul apart and anchor a fragment in an object. No matter what happens to your body, even if it's destroyed, you can't truly die because part of your soul remains intact in the world. The dark magic required is so horrific that most wizards never attempt it." Harry's eyes lit up. "The locket. It has to be one of Voldemort's Horcruxes." Sirius nodded grimly. "Exactly. That locket you found. There was no plausible explanation for it. Its enchantments match every description we have of a Horcrux, and it makes sense. After all, the most infamous Parselmouth in this century is Voldemort himself." Harry frowned. "But why can I speak Parseltongue too? There's no Parselmouth blood in the Potters, as far as I know." Sirius exchanged a thoughtful look with Harry. "You've done more research into your family than most, especially as a Ravenclaw," he said. "Between what Ryan told you about the Deathly Hallows and your own sleuthing, you know the Potter lineage is pureblood. All pureblood families share common ancestors, just like the Gaunts who descend from Salazar Slytherin." Harry's face darkened. So you think Voldemort awakened my ability with that attack in Godric's Hollow, tapping into the same Parselmouth magic he has? It's the only explanation that fits, Sirius said. When he tried to curse you, some of his magic rebounded. It may have triggered the dormant Parseltongue talent in your blood. Harry sank back, silent for a moment. Then he spoke slowly, voice tight. The Gaunts and the Potters both trace back to the Peverells. That means Salazar's line and my own share the same ancient roots. Voldemort's magic only needed a spark to ignite what was already there. Sirius rested a hand on Harry's shoulder. It's unsettling, but it also gives us a clue. If your ability is truly linked to his, it might be our key to finding and destroying every last Horcrux. Harry squared his shoulders, determination flaring in his green eyes. Then let's do it. We'll track them all down and finish this for good. Harry frowned. So it isn't impossible that I have the gift of Parseltongue? Sirius gave him a wry smile. At first, you probably thought Parseltongue was exclusive to Slytherin's line, passed down to the Gaunts with no connection to the Peverells. But this is your gift too, Harry. Don't fight it. One day, it may be exactly what you need. Harry opened his mouth to argue, but Sirius continued, sounding uncharacteristically regretful. I've had my own talents, knowledge of the dark arts, but I turned away from them. If I hadn't, Dumbledore wouldn't have had to examine Regulus's body so carefully. He shook his head. Don't shy away from what you're born with. Talent and curiosity aren't wrong. Harry's thoughts drifted to the resurrection stone resting in his pocket, the last heirloom of the Gaunt family. Perhaps its ancient enchantments would awaken his Parseltongue ability when the time was right. He closed his eyes, nodded, and said quietly, I understand. By 9 o'clock, Sirius was slipping out the front door, a mysterious gleam in his eye. No one knew where he was headed. Lupin yawned over a bowl of porridge that Creature had prepared, while Ron and Draco emerged from their rooms, hair tousled and eyelids heavy. Though they looked every bit as groggy as Harry felt, all three couldn't hide their curiosity about the changes in the Black household, and why Sirius had gone to bed so early the night before. It seems he'd arranged all of this behind our backs. No one saw it coming, not even me, Lupin murmured, bending to inhale the gentle fragrance of the vines and blossoms that crept across the table. Ron, half asleep, groaned and rubbed his eyes, until the headline in the Daily Prophet in front of him caught his attention. Gilderoy Lockhart, arrested. Just like that, every trace of drowsiness vanished. If Ron's father hated someone, you could bet they weren't to be trusted, and now Ron realized Lockhart was far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. All those wild tales in Lockhart's best-selling books weren't fabrications or the flights of an over-imaginative Ravenclaw. They'd been chillingly real, but stolen. Lockhart had tracked down every wizard who'd achieved something remarkable, bested them in single combat, and then wiped their memories to claim the glory for himself. Ron sat bolt upright. He'd thought Lockhart a bumbling fool. Instead, he'd been a consummate predator. Draco let out a low whistle. Incredible, he said. You'd never guess it from his ego and those gaudy robes. But this just proves how powerful Ravenclaws can be. Lockhart and his plundered conquests, Rita Skeeter sneaking into Hogwarts for her pictures, even Professor Flitwick, quiet, unassuming, was a dueling champion back in his day. Lupin met Draco's gaze. All the more reason to stay alert, Draco, he warned softly. You never know whose brilliance might hide a darker ambition. Ron leveled a deadly glare at Draco. Keep taunting me like this every day, he snarled, and don't be surprised if your fate ends up no better than those poor wizards Gilderoy Lockhart claimed to have defeated. Draco's smirk never wavered. Leaning back on his heels, he tossed his hair over one shoulder. Oh, spare me, Weasley. Voldemort was a Slytherin, too, so why aren't you shaking in your boots? Harry settled deeper into the corner bench, determined not to fan the flames of another one of their endless arguments. He'd seen this pair go at it countless times, just as he'd once secretly listened in on Sirius and Lupin's hushed conversation, and preferred to keep his distance. Instead, he idly flipped through the Black family tree, more to pass the time than out of genuine curiosity. A soft clatter of pans drew his attention. Creature, Harry asked, is Regulus coming out for dinner? The house elf emerged from behind the stove, ladle in hand, his voice a low, rasping whisper. No, Master Harry. Master Regulus is asleep in his chambers. He insists on total darkness and quiet. Harry nodded, folding the family tree and setting it aside. He had plenty of reasons to be intrigued by his mysterious cousin, but at the moment, only one question occupied his mind. How would everyone celebrate his birthday? Harry had sat through Dudley's birthday parties at the Dursleys enough times to last a lifetime, but he'd never had one of his own. And now, standing amidst this grand celebration in the wizarding world, he couldn't help but worry. Would he be expected to give a speech on stage? What would he even say? His hair refused to lie flat, bobbing rebelliously no matter how many smoothing charms he tried. Would those unruly tufts spoil the look of his brand-new dress robes? Professor Dumbledore was here too. What on earth should he say to him? And what gift might the headmaster have brought? A swirl of odd, thrilling thoughts danced through Harry's mind, stirring a happiness he'd never before known. Chapter 53, Birthday Gifts. Harry sat on the edge of the sofa, shoulders tight with nerves. The hour for his 12th birthday party had come, and he wasn't sure what to expect. Suddenly, an almost deafening cacophony of hoots filled the room, as owls of every size and color swooped in from every corner. White owls, black owls, even speckled ones, dozens of them, circled overhead before dropping their packages onto the low table in front of Harry with soft thuds, like a glittering meteor shower of birthday presents. He blinked in surprise. Before he could sort through the pile of neatly wrapped parcels, a familiar voice piped up from the doorway. "I almost forgot. Happy 12th, Harry!" Ron Weasley bounded into the room, brandishing a tiny, palm-sized gift box. "Here you go." Harry and Draco, who had come as Harry's reluctant but intrigued guest, stared at the little package. It was so small, it seemed impossible that anything significant could be inside. "Seriously?" Draco murmured, raising an eyebrow. Harry picked up the slender box, turning it over in his hands. "What is it?" Ron shot him a grin. "Open it." Harry undid the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside lay a single gleaming gold card. He stared at it in stunned silence, his throat suddenly dry. "Is this a devil's passport?" "Yep," said Ron, beaming. "Only one in existence." Harry's heart beat faster. "But you used this too?" He swallowed hard. "Isn't this the same one you gave me for Christmas?" Ron shrugged. "Well, I figured I'd just call it my present for the next 3 years. Consider this your ultimate gift." Harry's eyes softened at the thoughtfulness behind it. "Ron, I can't believe it." But Ron's grin only widened. "Don't look so shocked. You've saved my skin more times than I can count. You deserve something special." Harry lifted the golden card out of the box, turning it over in his palm. He felt a swell of gratitude for his best friend. Then Ron cleared his throat and glanced around the table. "By the way, Harry, you still owe me a birthday present." Harry froze. My birthday present for you?" Ron clasped his hands behind his head and leaned back casually. "Yep, the one I gave you at Christmas, remember? Now it's my turn." Harry opened his mouth, but no words came. Draco leaned forward, amused. "So this is how it goes, Potter. One gift, one gift." Harry set the golden passport back into its little box. His mind raced. He would find the perfect gift for Ron and hand it over before the day was out. After all, that's what friends do. He glanced at Draco, then back at Ron. "I'll find you something you'll never forget," he promised quietly. Ron laughed and ruffled Harry's hair. "That's the spirit." And as the final owl swooped from the chimney with the last parcel, Harry realized this birthday might just be his best one yet. Draco Malfoy shifted from foot to foot, a small package clutched behind his back. "Harry, maybe I should just take this and come back later tonight?" Harry snatched the parcel away before Draco could tuck it out of sight. "Don't be silly," he said, tucking it under his arm. "You're the best present here. Now give it to me." Draco's pale cheeks pinked, but he stepped forward and offered the gift. Harry wasted no time tearing off the wrapping. In the wizarding world, opening a present immediately in front of its giver was considered the highest compliment. Inside lay a pair of glasses with sleek, square black frames, almost like polished crystal. Harry lifted them out, turning them over in his hands. "What are these?" Draco cleared his throat, voice a little unsteady. "They're waterproof, Quidditch glasses, enchanted so they double as sunglasses. No glare, no fogging, and they stay perfectly dry, even when it's raining." A broad grin spread across Harry's face. He carefully removed his old spectacles and placed them in the velvet-lined case that had accompanied the new pair. Sliding the black frames onto his nose, he peered around the room. They fit perfectly, and I can see so clearly. Thank you, Draco. Relief flowed dead Draco's features as he returned Harry's smile. I'm really glad you like them. Harry gave his new glasses an appreciative tap. Like them? I love them. The two shared a satisfied look, the exchange of gifts bringing them closer than ever. Ron gave Harry a friendly pat on the shoulder. Good thing I splurged on a gold card for you, mate. Otherwise my gift would have looked rubbish next to the others. Draco Malfoy actually smiled as he stepped forward. Happy 12th birthday, Harry. This one's from me. Then Professor Lupin came over. His voice was calm, but Harry caught a faint note of embarrassment, an echo of the awkward first greeting Ryan had received when he arrived in the wizarding world. Harry knew that feeling well. All Lupin's stellar credentials, former Hogwarts prefect, top student back in his day, were overshadowed by the knowledge that he was a werewolf. With Sirius still in Azkaban, decent employment would be hard to come by. Draco had already dismissed Lupin's gift as cheap and tossed it aside this morning. Harry tore open the paper, eager not to leave the professor waiting. Oh, thank you, Professor. It's wonderful. He held up a delicate hand mirror, its frame lavishly engraved with Ravenclaw symbols. In the bottom corner, Lupin's neat handwriting read, I made this myself. It was beautiful, and Harry knew exactly how much care had gone into its creation. Remus Lupin shifted uncomfortably under their praise, but he couldn't hide his pride for long. It's enchanted to glow whenever you need it, he explained, holding up the small orb. In total darkness, it shines like a torch, illuminating everything around you. That's brilliant, Ron gushed, practically bouncing in his seat. He clearly took perverse delight in seeing Lupin blush. Dark creatures hate light. This will free up our wands for other spells. Draco, not to be outdone, offered a more measured smile. Really clever, Remus. I'd never thought of that. He gave his friend an encouraging nod. Harry turned the orb over in his hand, eyes alight. Thank you, Professor. It's perfect. At last Lupin relaxed, breaking into a genuine grin. Harry made a mental note never to open a present in front of Ron and Draco again. No matter how wonderful the gift, they'd all swarm to comment. He tucked the glowing orb and the other surprises into his satchel and slipped back to his dormitory to stow them away. When he returned to the common room, the atmosphere had transformed completely. Dozens of sky-blue blossoms drifted above them, each petal twinkling with tiny stars. As the flowers hovered in midair, their glittering lights wove themselves into letters. Harry Potter, happy 12th birthday! A chorus of delighted voices rose around him as Harry looked up, astonished and more than a little touched. Remus Lupin stood at the edge of the clearing and gave his wand a graceful wave. Swirls of blue and bronze banners sprang to life, draping themselves over the spare trees and bushes. With a final flick, he shifted their hues to a soft sky blue. I almost feel like I'm back in the Ravenclaw common room, Ron said, watching the transformation. Thank you, Ron. Lupin replied with a warm smile. He turned toward Sirius and Dumbledore. Your turns! At his cue, Sirius's robes blazed into a vibrant red, while Dumbledore appeared in cozy Muggle-style pajamas, sky-blue flannel embroidered with stars and moons. Dumbledore raised his wand and called out, Happy birthday, Harry! A stream of white cream arced from his wand onto what looked like empty air above the rectangular table. The moment the cream touched it, a cake solidified, a golden sponge sculpted into the shape of a phoenix. As more cream swept across its surface, the phoenix's feathers glowed red and gold. Then, with a final flourish, Dumbledore coaxed a clear, melodious song forth from the cake, the unmistakable voice of Fawkes himself. Lupin, Ron, and Draco stared in astonishment. It's amazing, Ron whispered. And it sings, Draco added wide-eyed. Lupin laughed softly. Best birthday, ye surprise ever. Sirius seemed to have known exactly how you'd react. Harry's lips trembled, and he barely found his voice. Harry, I've got something for you, Sirius said, offering a small book bound in plain black leather, no title on the cover. With shaking hands, Harry accepted it and pried it open. The first page held a single photograph, a black-haired toddler clutching a tiny broom, hovering just a few inches off the ground, laughing as two adult hands reached out in mock pursuit. That's you, Sirius whispered. That little broom was my gift to you on your first birthday. It could barely lift you more than 2 feet, which is why Lily used to tease me. You nearly smashed a vase and scared the cat trying to prove how high you could fly. Harry swallowed hard. He turned the pages slowly, each one revealing another cherished memory he'd never seen before. His parents sharing tea by a sunny window, Lily straightening his hair with a gentle smile, their cozy home alive with warmth and laughter. Every photograph was a glimpse into the family he'd lost, but never truly forgotten. And in that moment, Harry realized this book was far more than a gift. It was a bridge to the past, lovingly handed to him by someone who understood exactly what he needed. Chapter 54. Quarrel. Harry stared at the photograph in disbelief. That garish, awkwardly shaped vase had to be Aunt Petunia's doing. He wiped a smudge from his glasses and managed a wry grin. The design was so unmistakably her style, like everything in the Dursley home. Aunt Petunia insisted on patterned carpets, frilly tablecloths, and ornate knickknacks, all in that same drab, pastel palette that only she seemed to appreciate. Harry knew Uncle Vernon had pleaded repeatedly to replace them, but Petunia held her ground every time. So it really is a present from her, Harry said, shifting his weight. Of all people, she gave me this hideous thing. He traced the vase's curled handles with his fingertip in the photo. It's as prized to her as Ron's Nimbus 2001. Sirius Black scoffed. I never understood why Lily cared so much for her sister. Petunia's so prickly, always bitter about wizards and magic. And honestly, she isn't exactly a beauty. Dumbledore raised a kindly eyebrow at Sirius's remark. We must be careful not to judge by appearances, he chided gently. With a flick of his wand, a chair flew in from the corner and settled neatly next to him, though he overlooked inviting Sirius to sit. If you cannot see why Lily loved her sister, then you'll never understand why Petunia risked so much to raise her niece. Harry folded his arms, mulling over Dumbledore's words. The vase, ugly as it was, now seemed a symbol of something far deeper, Petunia's silent loyalty to the memory of a sister she truly cared for, in her own complicated way. Dumbledore straightened his robes and spoke in a brisk, measured tone. You may attribute Harry's survival to Lily's blood magic, but Petunia never understood any of that. She took him in only after her sister and brother-in-law were murdered by terrorists. Yes, terrorists, Harry. I chose the word very deliberately. He paused, turning to Harry with a soft, almost tender expression. And if we're being honest, Petunia wasn't cruel to you when you were little. Maybe, Sirius muttered under his breath. The single word grumbled in a voice that sounded disturbingly like Creature's. Harry raised an eyebrow. No wonder the house elf had such a fierce impression on people. Creature was older than Sirius and had spent far more time at Grimmauld Place than his young master ever had. Harry suddenly sat up straighter. Wait, did you say they have a cat? Sirius looked genuinely puzzled. Yes, a cat. Her name's Snowflake. Harry's heart lurched. Godric's Hollow, his real home, was where his parents had fallen. What if Snowflake had died too? Or worse, wandered off and starved because no one cared for her? His stomach churned at the thought of that lonely little cat. Sirius shrugged as though he were discussing the weather, not Harry's childhood pet. Snowflake's fine, Harry. Don't worry. But Harry wasn't so sure. He closed his eyes, picturing that snowy white fur, and wondered what fate had really befallen his old friend. Sirius likely never realized how deeply the Black family's prejudices had been hammered into his soul. He would never have suspected that cats or house elves might possess feelings of their own, much less ones worthy of respect. One evening in the Slytherin common room, Ron leaned back against a window seat and grinned at Draco. I know why Harry hates cats, he declared. Whenever the Dursleys go off on holiday, they ship Harry off to that old muggle woman, Mrs. Arabella Figg. She keeps more cats than you can count. Draco's eyes narrowed. A secret only he and Harry knew? It felt impossible. He must be imagining it. Another hidden connection, he wondered, but forced himself to sound casual. Come on, Weasley, you've only just met Potter. Fair enough, Ron said with an exaggerated shrug. But out of all the students at Hogwarts, who really likes cats? They're usually cooped up in the dorms anyway. Draco shrugged. True, though there is that one Slytherin, Millicent Bulstrode, right? Exactly. Ron's grin grew mischievous. So, you're not secretly in love with her, are you? Malfoy's cheeks warmed. Why on earth would I be? Good to know, Ron said, settling back. Because, aside from Harry, I happen to have a couple of crushes myself. As the firelight flickered over their faces, Draco found himself wondering just how many small surprises Hogwarts still held. Draco glanced around the corridor, then pulled Ron aside with a conspiratorial grin. If you pretend to be my date to the Yule Ball, our parents won't bat an eye at how close Harry and I are. Ron's eyes lit up. That's actually not bad, except I absolutely can't stand Millicent Bulstrode. Draco chuckled. Perfect. She's nearly as big as Crabbe and Goyle, with about twice the chin. No one will suspect you of sneaking off together. Ron scowled. If I hated her that much, why do you think I keep teasing her? Draco's smirk turned wry. Because deep down, you care. You're just as quick to judge looks as she is. Harry, leaning against the wall, covered his mouth to stifle a laugh. He watched the two sparring like someone settled in for fresh popcorn. Down in the great hall, Creature flitted from table to table, setting out platters of roast beef, buttery potatoes, and delicate tartlets beside the cake in the center. Meanwhile, Sirius and Dumbledore made their way through the shadows toward Regulus Black's room at the bottom of the grand staircase. We should hurry before lunch is served, Sirius urged, glancing anxiously at the gleaming silverware in the dining hall. Don't worry, Dumbledore replied softly, placing a reassuring hand on Sirius's arm. I will not harm Regulus. He has risked his life for our cause against Voldemort. Sirius forced a tight-lipped smile, but his eyes betrayed him. Dumbledore noted the deeper concern lingering there, a brother's fear for his sibling. At last Sirius spoke, his voice low. Albus, I trust you, but I can't shake my doubts. Harry may be a hero of ours now, but what do we really know about his past? Sirius spoke in a hush, careful not to wake Regulus as he lay resting in the darkness, gathering his strength. He didn't want Professor Dumbledore stepping into Regulus's room until they'd had a chance to speak privately. Dumbledore's pale blue eyes were grave. I understand how precious your brother's return is, he said softly. After all these years thinking him lost, I can't tell you how deeply I feel that. But as for Harry, you've insisted time and again that the Dursleys remain the best and safest guardians for him. Sirius's chest tightened. He'd made that same argument until his voice was raw. He leaned against the doorframe, voice trembling. I know, Albus. I know you mean well, but I'm terrified that exposing Regulus could put him in even greater danger. What if the best choice is to let him remain hidden, or worse, to lose him all over again? I can't bear that. I just want things to stay as they are. Tears brimmed in Sirius's eyes. Even if he's only an illusion, even if he isn't truly Regulus, I'd rather hold on to this hope. At that moment, the door to the inner chamber creaked open. Regulus stepped out in white pajamas that pooled around his ankles. Though he wore the face of a grown man, his wide eyes held a childlike fragility. He took a tentative step toward Sirius, then gently brushed away his brother's tears with a shaking hand. Sirius closed the distance in an instant, pulling Regulus into a fierce embrace. Every fiber of his being vowed protection, no matter the cost. Dumbledore watched quietly from the threshold, his expression softening. When Sirius finally released Regulus, he met Dumbledore's gaze with steady eyes. I understand, he said. You have my word. Dumbledore drew in a slow breath and let it hiss out through his teeth. If his very existence was unsteady, if freeing the soul trapped in his body might be the kinder choice, then, well, you know what I mean. In that case, please, give me a little more time. Without another word, Sirius seized his brother's hand and led him to the slightly ajar bedroom door. With a decisive shove, he swung it open and urged, Come on, Dumbledore. Chapter 55. The Physical Examination. The chamber lay cloaked in darkness. On a sprawling, velvet-draped bed lay Regulus Black, his shirt discarded, his pale chest rising and falling with ragged breaths. Two slender, ancient hands traced deliberate patterns over his skin, each touch sending a shiver through him. He stiffened, panic flickering in his wide eyes, but the unwavering gaze of Albus Dumbledore held him silent. Sirius Black stood at the threshold, wand already in hand. Professor, he called, voice taut with impatience, shall I light a candle? Dumbledore paused, fingertips hovering above Regulus's ribs. No, Sirius, he answered softly. In darkness, his magic heals more swiftly. Sirius's knuckles whitened. He'd been ready to banish the shadows, along with whatever impropriety he suspected lay hidden in them. But the calm certainty in Dumbledore's tone gave him pause. He watched the headmaster's long fingers glide across Regulus's chest, saw the soft violet glow now pulsing faintly at the wand's tip. It was the unmistakable signature of a complex healing charm, one that demanded direct contact and the absence of light. Despite the rumble of outrage twisting in his gut, because Dumbledore had insisted the boy lie bare beneath those delicate ministrations, Sirius forced himself to lower his wand. Yes, the headmaster's actions teetered on the intimate, and Sirius could not deny an edge of suspicion over his motives. But this was Dumbledore at his most skilled. Every movement precise, every incantation measured. With the room in perfect quiet, save for the soft susurrus of magic weaving itself through Regulus's weakened body, Sirius leaned against the doorframe. He clenched and unclenched his jaw as he watched the old wizard coax strength back into his younger brother, no matter how audacious the method appeared. In the gathering darkness, the bond between healer and patient glowed more potent than any candlelight ever could. In a quiet, non-combat setting, a witch or wizard can truly appreciate the nuances of magic. No grand smoke screens or ping-pong tables required. Such flashy tricks usually betray an inexperienced practitioner, and yet Sirius found himself nearly losing his composure. Watching the venerable Professor Dumbledore, an old man well over 100 years, bend over his younger brother, felt like nothing less than pimping out Regulus. His knuckles whitened around his wand, his face grew dark with resentment. Dumbledore, meanwhile, was crouched beside Regulus, hands moving gently over his brother's robes. He paused, closed his eyes for a moment, then spoke in a calm voice. "I've examined him. He's perfectly all right." Relief crashed over Sirius. He snagged a spare wizard's robe and slipped it around Regulus's shoulders. "Are you hurt anywhere?" he asked, voice trembling so much he forgot to breathe. The dire image he'd conjured of Dumbledore fell away. There was nothing ominous in the headmaster's touch. "All our worries were for nothing," Sirius murmured. "Indeed," Dumbledore agreed, offering a nod instead of one of his usual cryptic riddles. In that moment, Sirius couldn't have been happier. He swept Regulus into a tight hug and would have danced if his robe hadn't tangled around his legs. Regulus, confused but relieved, returned the embrace with a sweet, innocent smile. And then Sirius noticed it, the very slightest lift at the corners of Dumbledore's lips, a faint, knowing smile that hadn't reached his eyes. Sirius's own smile froze. What did the headmaster know that he wasn't telling? If Sirius could see Professor Dumbledore's expression now, he might have felt less anxious. Albus's lips were curled in a subtle, knowing smile, almost like a tiny tick at the corner of his mouth. Sirius's heart thudded in his chest. "That's the bad news?" he whispered. Dumbledore raised a gentle hand. "No, what you need to worry about isn't that your brother Regulus will abandon you. Rather, it's that Regulus might one day fear you'll abandon him." Sirius's shoulders slumped. He blinked back tears. Dumbledore paused, letting the weight of his words settle, then delivered the true concern. "Regulus is likely to live a very long life." For a moment, relief washed over Sirius's face. Then doubt crept back in. "But he's still so young. Practically a child. What will he do when I'm centuries old or gone?" Dumbledore's eyes were kind. "He won't be alone. Creature serves him now, and in time, Creature will pass on his duties to his descendants. House elves dedicate themselves to their masters across generations. Age never hinders them." Sirius exhaled, sinking into a chair as though he'd been carrying the world on his shoulders. He sounded like any parent fretting over a child's future. Then he paused, remembering who he was and what the Black family commanded. He managed a small, rueful smile. "Of course, I'm a Black. We have house elves. With Creature and his successors by Regulus's side, he'll be all right without me." In that moment, Sirius felt a flicker of hope for his younger brother's future, long after he himself would be gone. Creature was down in the kitchen, poking at the dying embers on the hearth, when he let out a thunderous sneeze that rattled the iron kettles. Upstairs in the drawing room, Albus Dumbledore cleared his throat. Sirius Black, however, didn't so much as glance up from the ledgers and dusty parchments spread before him. "Sirius," Dumbledore said quietly, "do you truly believe Regulus can learn to stand on his own, without the house elves?" Sirius's quill hovered over the page, ink drying to a tacky sheen. His thoughts were tangled in the Black family archives, poring over ancestral deeds, unraveling which properties were bound by ancient contracts, and deciding which he'd have to abandon to avoid legal pitfalls. Which estates could he claim even if Regulus never surfaced again? Which ones would vanish by magic if the rightful heir failed to appear? Questions upon questions, all demanding answers before any future could be planned. At last, Dumbledore rose and crossed to the windowsill, hands clasped behind his back. Regulus has lost his memories, he said, choosing each word with care. That does not diminish his talents or his mind. Right now, he's more like a child, entirely capable of learning, so long as we give him the time. Before long, I believe he will grow into a fully trained wizard, able to chart his own course. Sirius set down his quill and rubbed his eyes. He'd known Regulus as an eager boy, but ever since the Dark Lord had transformed him into an Inferius, his brother had been little more than a pawn trapped in a jar of ice. 10 years, 10 long years, lay between that bright youth and the empty shell they'd found at Grimmauld Place. Could all that time be undone? 10 years as an Inferius, Sirius muttered. That's not something you can just wipe away. In the doorway, Regulus glanced up from the vacancy of his queue, an expression blossoming on his face that was at once achingly pure and achingly naive. He offered Sirius a tentative smile, as open and trusting as any child's. Sirius stared at him, the ledger forgotten. In that moment, something shifted, pity, hope, and the faintest echo of brotherly love. He found himself returning the smile, uncertain, maybe even foolish, but genuine all the same. Chapter 12. A most unlikely reunion. The late afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows of the great hall, casting long, golden beams across the marble floor. Sirius Black's laughter rang out as he faced his younger brother, Regulus, who stood stiffly by the nearest bench. At the high table, Albus Dumbledore watched in growing discomfort, his half-moon spectacles glinting with concern. "Has it really been so long?" Sirius asked, shaking his head in disbelief. "Is it possible you only learned to speak after I died?" He threw back his head and roared with laughter. "I thought you'd been trapped underground, surrounded by Inferi, those mindless things, incapable even of speech. And here you are, standing in front of me like nothing ever happened." Regulus's cheek is burned. Years spent battling cold, silent horrors had left him rusty with words and uneasy in company. Now, under Sirius's unrestrained amusement, he felt every awkward pause and faltering syllable. Sirius dabbed at his eye. Maybe there's something to the whole Horcrux theory after all. Voldemort split his soul into 6 pieces. Just imagine if he'd eliminated a couple more Death Eaters and turned them into Horcruxes too, when he inevitably returns. His grin turned maniacal. He could just pluck one of them out like an extra freezer-burned pudding. Brilliant, right? And killing. It's just a flick of the wand. Dumbledore cleared his throat so softly that only the 2 brothers or a very alert house elf could have heard. He regretted ever vouching for Sirius's admission to the Order of the Phoenix, let alone entrusting him with Hogwarts' headship. Was this wild rant the mark of a responsible wizard? Sirius, oblivious to the headmaster's discomfort, swept an arm toward Regulus. "But that's neither here nor there. Look at you, alive and well, despite years of being toyed with by dark magic. And," he pointed at the sumptuous robe Regulus had tried on during their Torsluduan reunion. With a loud rip, the heavy cloth gave way at the seams and tumbled to the floor in tatters. Regulus gaped, mortified. "I'm sorry," he stammered, stooping to gather the ruined garment. Sirius clapped him on the shoulder. "Don't apologize for my entertainment, little brother. Family reunions are supposed to be messy." At that moment, Dumbledore rose, his voice firm yet gentle. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation in my office, just the 3 of us, away from prying ears, and making sure no more robes are harmed." Sirius bowed theatrically. "Lead the way, headmaster." He gave Regulus one last conspiratorial wink. "Welcome back, Reg. It's good to have you home." Regulus managed a hesitant smile as he followed Dumbledore from the hall, Sirius's laughter echoing softly behind them. For the first time in years, the Black brothers walked side by side, old wounds beginning to heal in the warmth of newfound laughter and the promise of second chances. Ron was the first to appear at the door, a handful of heads poking out behind him. He cracked it open, took a quick look inside the dimly lit room, then snapped it shut again. We were about to call out that dinner was ready when Harry's voice drifted down the corridor. "Maybe you should take a shower first," he suggested, his tone oddly casual. Draco's response was strangely offhand. Sirius shifted uncomfortably, and Lupin cleared his throat. "I think I'll go find an empty room," he offered. They all exchanged puzzled looks. By rights, Dumbledore should be examining Regulus's body right now, yet, after what they'd just witnessed inside, none of them could stop replaying the scene. The rumpled sheets, the faint lingering scent in the air, and the scandalous whispers about Dumbledore in his youth. Logic told them everything was probably fine, but their imaginations refused to let go. Chapter 56. Non-Existence. Albus Dumbledore's reputation in the wider wizarding world has always been shrouded in mystery. Before the Daily Prophet ran its exposé on Dudley Dursley's runaway teenage antics, very few witches or wizards had any inkling of Dumbledore's private affairs or the severity of Dudley's early misbehavior. And of course, Dumbledore's lifelong bachelorhood raised no eyebrows. After all, a wizard of his stature could conjure entire landscapes within his mind, making the unreal more vivid than reality itself. But everything changed when Dumbledore's relationship with Gellert Grindelwald came to light. Overnight, rumor and suspicion spread through every corner of the magical community. Harry and his friends found themselves reluctant to pry too deeply into the matter. None of them wanted to add fuel to the fire. Even Sirius Black, who understood Dumbledore's true motives better than most, couldn't keep the edge of distrust out of his gaze. At one point, with a strangely triumphant smile, Sirius announced, "I suppose it's time I explained something." He looked around at the others and continued, "You all know I examined Regulus Black's body when I arrived." At that admission, Dumbledore felt the shift in the room, hesitation, disbelief, a flicker of hostility. Yet he remained utterly composed. He had grown accustomed to this level of scrutiny ever since stories of Harry's childhood and Dudley's scandalous exploits had dominated the Prophet's front pages. Indeed, the gossip had become so pervasive that even Newt Scamander's wife, Tina, had penned a pointed letter to the editor, hinting at an abnormally close bond between her husband and Dumbledore. Professors and students at Hogwarts whispered similar suspicions in the corridors. Through it all, Dumbledore simply let the rumors swirl around him, his calm demeanor never once faltering. Only Hagrid seemed utterly unfazed by the sensational newspaper reports. He was convinced they were nothing more than Rita Skeeter's fabrications, and Dumbledore half-joked that if Rita ever dared to show her face near Hagrid, Hagrid would tear her to pieces. "Well then, let's be off," Sirius said, and at his prompting, Dumbledore calmly opened the door and stepped outside. Regulus, however, remained behind in the room. Sirius wasn't shunning his brother out of malice. He'd simply noticed that Regulus flourished in darkness, perhaps even more than Sirius or Old Creature did. In fact, Regulus barely needed to eat. Habit and faint memories of his former life led him to consume meals, but Sirius's informal observations suggested that an hour spent alone in pitch-black solitude restored Regulus far more effectively than any dinner could. These days, Creature no longer fussed over preparing elaborate dishes for his favorite master. Instead, the moment Regulus ventured into the hallway, Creature would appear to extinguish every candle and lamp in his path, ensuring his master could move comfortably through the shadows. Sirius steeled himself and followed the tall, thin figure of Professor Dumbledore into the living room, which had been transformed into something between an enchanted wood and a fairy glen. Twinkling lights dangled from the ceiling like fireflies, and ivy crept along the walls. At the center stood a long, rectangular table heaped with tempting dishes. Phoenix cake glowing softly at the head, Creature's famous French onion soup in bubbling tureens, steaming boiled potatoes, rich savory stews, syrup-soaked fruit pie, and hearty steak and kidney pie. Despite the feast before him, Ron sat at the table, restlessly tapping his fork against his plate. He knew better than to start eating until Dumbledore and Sirius had taken their seats, and, hunger winning out over patience, he'd even opened the door first, unable to wait a moment longer. "Professor! Sirius! Finally!" Ron exclaimed, his previous frustration forgotten. He beamed as if they were late guests at a party he'd been hosting alone. "And how is Regulus?" Ron added quickly, shifting gears to ease the awkward radness of the moment. Sirius offered a warm smile. I examined him when we arrived. He's fine. Dumbledore nodded in agreement, settling into his chair as the rest of them followed suit. With everyone at the table, the magical feast could truly begin. Despite the awkwardness of the earlier scene, word that Regulus was unharmed spread relief through the household. Harry Parker was the first to grin. That's fantastic. No more dreadfully early mornings for you, Regulus. Thank goodness, Remus Lupin agreed, rubbing his temples. Master Regulus, my old master's only legitimate heir, is safe and sound at last. Just then, Creature bustled into the room with a scrape of leather. Creature wishes to speak with the mistress, and as abruptly as he'd arrived, he slipped away again. Sirius Black, ever disdainful of pure-blood formalities, couldn't resist a smirk and a round of applause. Well, I've been up at dawn prepping for my birthday party, so I'm not exactly missing early risers these days. Harry raised an eyebrow. Wait, you've been up that early? Because of Regulus? You lost sleep worrying about him? Sirius lounged back, self-satisfied. Naturally. Now that he's on the mend, everything else feels like a breeze. Ron Weasley pointedly cleared his throat. But why was he completely naked just now? I mean, I get that he wasn't himself, but still. A flush colored Sirius's cheeks at the reminder, and the room grew tense, until Draco Malfoy stepped forward. Let's move on, he suggested smoothly, offering Ron a glance of apology. What really matters is Regulus's condition. He hasn't eaten, and for a time his eyes couldn't bear the light. At that moment, Headmaster Dumbledore stirred, his silver beard catching the torchlight as he rose from the high-backed chair at the head of the table. Fixing the room with his calm, piercing gaze, he said, Regulus's state is truly extraordinary. Some ancient magic seems to have stirred within him, something we have never seen manifest in any wizard before. From what I can tell, Dumbledore said, spoon paused over his bowl, it draws on the surrounding darkness, absorbing whatever energy it needs to survive. Ron's eyes lit up, and he waved his fork like a flag. So it's a lot like a boggart, then? My dad's always going on about how boggarts love tight, dark spots, closets, under beds, behind sinks, even that skinny corner beneath a desk. He says they'll take over a grandpa clock if you leave it in the shadows long enough. Dumbledore lowered his fork, hoping the invitation to begin his meal might finally quiet Ron. But of course it didn't. The centuries-old wizard blinked in surprise, as if he'd never encountered a more determined chatterbox. Comparing this thing to a boggart, Dumbledore sighed, is about as sensible as calling a newborn baby the mother of a dog. Harry shot Draco a withering look, while Sirius covered his grin with one hand. Lupin raised an eyebrow, silently wondering if Arthur Weasley had somehow misplaced the real Ron and brought back an eccentric impersonator. Hermione folded her arms and leaned forward. Actually, boggarts aren't proper creatures at all. They're a sort of quasi-existence, hovering between life and death. They aren't born in the usual way, nor do they truly die. They're spawned by our fears, and they feed on our emotions. At that, the room fell into a thoughtful hush, the only sound the soft crackle of the hearth fire. They seemed to spring up everywhere, in rotten places like fungi. And like Dementors, every one of these non-beings can fly unaided, a feat almost unheard of for wizards. Dumbledore had pointed this out more than once, and Harry couldn't help wondering, if non-beings can do it, could Dumbledore himself fly the way Ryan does? And what of Regulus Black? He's alive, fully human, not some magical fungus. Dumbledore leaned back in his chair. That essentially is the situation, he said at last. Ron, who'd been listening with only half an ear, reached for another slice of pie and munched away as he spoke. He rattled off one tea, hot after another, barely pausing for breath, and seemed not to notice how much he was actually saying. Harry was glad Creature wasn't present. Otherwise the house elf might have stormed off in disgust, convinced that Master Harry's friends were nothing more than traitorous, pure-blood scoundrels.